and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. So today we have a return guest, Matthew Ehret, and he is a phenomenal researcher, historian, author, and he just asks questions that most people just don't think to ask. And so today we're going to have a fascinating conversation about Jack the Ripper. But before we do that, I want to remind you that we just did the Cognitive Liberty Conference, and you can still get tickets to watch the replay. That's at cognitivelibertyconference.com. And it superseded my expectations, and knowing the speakers we had, that is saying quite a bit. So I highly recommend you check it out. We're still offering tickets, because we had promised that people could have it on demand until October 20th. And so we are upholding that, and you can still go and check it out and get your tickets so you can watch the replay. And it is, I think, 15 and a half hours of content. So it was quite a information-packed event. So check that out, cognitivelibertyconference.com. And if you want to support the work that I am doing here, you can also check out CourtenayTurner.com. And that is spelled like Courtenay. For those of you who are listening, not watching, I spell my name a little bit differently. It is Courtenay, but it is spelled like Courtenay. That's COURTENAYTURNER.com. And we have all sorts of ways that you can support the work. You can send me a Venmo at Courtenay. Again, that's Courtenay-Turner. Or you might see an orange circle with a coffee mug in the middle. You can buy me a coffee or a few. Or if you prefer to go analog, which I know many choose to do these days, and I've received some beautiful handwritten letters, which are always a treat, you can send those and financial support as well to Courtenay Turner, 6041 Rural Plains Circle, Suite 110, number 106, Franklin, Tennessee, 37064. We also have some really great affiliate sponsors. So we've got the RNC store, and I take my apricot seeds every single day. I take 3 in the morning, and then sometimes I may take 3 in the evening. And these are your B17 products, otherwise known as Laetril. And they have amygdala, which you can also get the book that tells you all about it, The Legend G. Edward Griffin wrote, A World Without Cancer. And the Red Pill Expo is actually coming up soon. And I believe we have an affiliate link for that as well. So you can get your discount to see J. Edward Griffin's Red Pill Expo and all the great speakers that are there. But rncstore.com, use the promo code COURTZ, COURTZ, to get your discount on all of those products. And then, yes, we'll have the Red Pill Expo link below, and you can get your discount for that. And we also have the satellitephonestore.com, and you can use promo code QUARTZ to get your communication preparedness. And you can use these phones for any type of phone call. It does not have to be to another satellite phone. That's the most common question I get asked. You can call a cell phone, a landline, any number. And this is a great way to stay prepared in any kind of an emergency, or if you're just in a place that is rural and doesn't have cell phone service, which surprisingly is actually quite a bit of the world. So use your promo code COURTZ, COURTZ, and you will get the phone free, which is a huge discount because it is quite an expensive phone. But you'll get that free, and then you will just pay for the service. There's all sorts of other communication preparedness resources at the site available as well. So that's satellitephonestore.com. And then we also have Relax Sauna. And I know for many of us, it's been quite hot. I'm here in Middle Tennessee. It's been about 100 degrees most of the days this week. So you might not be thinking about sauna, but I personally use the sauna even in the summer, even in 100-degree weather, because the health benefits are just so incredible. And I personally just enjoy it. So you can use your promo code COURTZ, COURTZ, to get $100 off. And even if you're not thinking about using it now, winter will be coming. So relaxsaunas.com. And we have some other really great products too. So if you want to support the work, please head on over to CourtenayTurner.com and check all of that out. And let's bring on Matthew Ehret. How are you doing today?
Hey, Courtenay, I'm doing very well. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, we're in recovery mode.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a ton of work you guys put into it. I'm really looking forward to watching your the recording of the conference. Sounds great.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah, I'll be very curious to hear that. So how did you go down this rabbit hole? So I just learned that the video I watched on Edgar Allan Poe was actually 5 years ago. So And then, but you recently did this whole series, and that led you to Jack the Ripper. How did that even come about? Like, where was the thread for that?
Yeah, right. Because we're going to be talking about Jack the Ripper, but the context is important. Like, how the hell did I start thinking about that? Well, it sort of came up like most discoveries do, kind of unexpectedly. You know, you're just pulling on things and trying to follow leads without carrying in too many prejudices or axioms that might blind you to discoveries you could have made had you not held on to your assumptions.
Right.
So you try to go into things with an open mind. And this series that I began on Edgar Poe's Cultural Warrior, what you're looking at there is part 13 of a series. Ultimately, there's 18 parts that are all finished. They're part of a project that I have to write a book, but not just one book, 3 books. So I'm writing sort of 3 books at the same time, and they're all about done. And what's interesting about this is that they're all sort of converging at the same place. So they're but from 3 different sort of vantage points, dealing with the like what is behind the occult takeover, not only of America, but the subversion of the better aspect of Western civilization that's been internally subverted from within, which was not, I mean, it's not something that happened overnight, and it's multi-generational. So what did that look like? And for me, I guess part of this, okay, I'm going to go through the real like train of where my mind went every step of the way.
Yeah.
Getting us to the Jack the Ripper study, which was a 6-part study within this broader 18-part study, which is the book on Edgar Poe's Cultural Warrior, which is one of the 3 books that I'm going to be releasing at the same time. So, okay. So just not to confuse people, and I do want to get at the meat and potatoes, but the first thing is that I only began to do a treatment of Edgar Poe in a serious way in a book format because of the final chapter of the Occult Tesla series. So I've already been on your show. Us and Lee, we're talking about, my work on the occult underpinnings of the Nikola Tesla operation over a century ago. And obviously what's partially in my mind is how Elon Musk is Tesla 2.0. So it's the exact same template. Oh, there it is right there. That was quick. So what I've beginning as I did with the assumption that Nikola Tesla was this great genius originally, but going into it, I started pulling on certain anomalies, like his close association with like a 1-degree separation with Aleister Crowley, the role of his towers as being transmitters to German intelligence, which itself was very much occupied by a high-level occultists tied to Theosophy, or at least a spin-off group from Theosophy run by Franz Hartmann, who was the leader of the German branch of the Theosophists, and he created a whole network around Guido von List and Lanz Lebenfeld, who created the Ariosophists, and the Armanon order. So all of these different Theosophists became very, very enmeshed within German intelligence. They were tied to Russian intelligence, French and British intelligence, and were advising leading generals of Germany. And what I found in the course of that study was that, two of Tesla's towers in Long Island were actually were being funded by the Germans, were transmitting material, information to the Germans that also led up to things like, or accounted for how the Germans got information regarding the Lusitania, transmitting, weaponry into the war while America was neutral, resulting in that sinking and creating a sort of a 9/11 situation that, created an argument that America should join World War I. So again, that was American naval intelligence at the time conducted a report. They tied it directly to Tesla and the Crowley networks. And then, the more I dug on that one, I realized that, okay, the whole thing that I've been told about Tesla seems to be a big magic trick, a big sorcerer's magic trick tied to some of the leading figures around Blavatsky, around Edward Bulwer Lytton, who's a leading Rosicrucian who led the Rosicrucian revival in the 19th century in England and more broadly, who plays a big role in the Jack the Ripper story too, as I came to discover. Didn't realize that was going to happen. So just to carry that forward a little bit, but towards the end of that occult Tesla series, which is going to be its own book, so that's going to be another one of the 3 books. That's also one of the later chapters involved my realization that these occult networks in America, that Tesla and Crowley were parts of, was actually being resisted quite effectively by the figure of Harry Houdini, who's today kind of just known as a magician, a guy who got out of locks. But when I actually started looking at the real Houdini, Harry Houdini, I developed such an amazing respect and realized he was so much more than I thought he was. He was really a counterintelligence operative of a very high level who understood the tricks of the trade of the Theosophists. You know, whenever you would have a modern oracle acting like they were channeling Kuthumi or whatever demon or some necromancy thing transmitting the messaging from a dead relative. There's a variety of techniques that were used, and Houdini knew how to use them. He knew what those techniques were. He knew how to do all of the different magic tricks, but he made it all intelligible so that he did demystify it for the minds of a very gullible population who were otherwise getting ready to accept a new post-Christian religion, which was being overseen by not only the Theosophists, and you've documented this quite well around Bailey and Besant. That's Houdini in action right there with his wife. But key figures like Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy who created Sherlock Holmes, was also one of the top controllers of the British Society for Psychical Research, who became Houdini's primary nemesis. And as I discovered in the course of that chapter, Houdini modeled his methodologies off of the figure of Edgar Allan Poe. And Houdini himself was part of the patriotic groupings of American intelligence that I had alluded to, who had been exposing these black magicians that had infiltrated our society before and during World War I. I found a few of the key personalities who were real solid patriots who recruited Houdini, and it didn't emerge onto itself, because this whole process was something that characterized much of the 19th century. And when you look at Edgar Allan Poe, as I did in that lecture that you listened to, that you happened upon by accident, Poe was himself demonstrably a member of American patriotic intelligence networks, especially the Society of the Cincinnati, that had been created by the founding fathers in order to create an intelligentsia that would be capable of basically fulfilling the objectives of the American Revolution that was understood was only a partial victory. You know, there was a lot that remained undealt with after 1781. So it was understood that you needed to create a culture of true citizens, and that would require leaders that would be real philosopher kings, capable of understanding how to upshift the culture, produce and encourage high literature, high cognitive powers, and also a good understanding of the nature of evil and how the enemy works to subvert their rivals from within. So the Society of Cincinnati was a major part of that. There were various Freemasonic lodges that were patriotic as well, that were instrumental in the success of the American Revolution itself, but that were also active during the 1820s, 1830s, and many of these were purged. And this is what the period that Edgar Allan Poe was active. And when you revisit a lot of his short stories, you could see that he's actually exposing the purge of Republican lodges by this other black magician takeover, this occult takeover that had been underway. Really, I mean, it got really bad between 1826 and 1840. That was like I would say the majority of patriotic Freemasonic outfits were wiped out during that so-called, you know, anti-Mason movement, which was actually run by the Scottish Northern and Southern branch. And so Poe is like in this mix, but it's not fully wiped out, even though Poe is murdered, and just like Houdini is murdered by the same networks. It continues on, and I found that this connection between Poe and Houdini, and also the child's trafficking networks that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was managing as I develop in that chapter. There was actually London to New York child trafficking networks that involved child sacrifice in these various satanic elite clubs in New York that were carrying out seances and other things for the elite. That's one of the essays in that series. So Doyle is a channeler. He's an overseer of this new spiritualist religion. He's an enemy of Houdini. He's also creating a character named Sherlock Holmes, who is a bastardization of a character that Edgar Poe had created earlier that Houdini despises, by the name of Inspector Charles Dupin. And so the first sort of inspector or criminal investigator in fiction was created by Poe. He did 3 stories of Inspector Dupin mysteries in the mid 1830s till early 1840s. He died in 1849, and it's very different. So Doyle is not just doing that; he's bastardizing what Poe is doing earlier, but he's also a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That's also what Doyle is a part of. He's really in it thick. So that put me now on a new track where I was like, okay, let's take a break from I've nearly finished the Tesla series or the Tesla book, but let's shift gears. Let's now look at the implications of this deeper takeover of America with a focus on Poe as cultural warrior. And that took me into, and I'm getting to Jack the Ripper. Mm-hmm. So one of the chapters in that study involved looking at Poe's method of ratiocination. That's what he called his tales of ratiocination, were these Inspector Dupin mysteries, which was basically teaching the citizens of America how to use their mind in a way which utilized deductive and inductive reasoning, but at the same time went beyond it, utilizing a higher method of analysis by context. So the mind has to be able to use induction and deduction a computer does that too. That's you start with a generality, and then you try to situate data or material evidence within the context of some generally assumed law. And you could develop ideas that explain things that you don't understand that way. Or inversely, you could start with just simply sensory data and look for patterns in your senses, any of the 5 senses, that you could then choose to extrapolate a pattern. So it's a lot of pattern association thinking into what you then call a universal. They're both useful in research, but neither one will allow you to make a discovery, like a real discovery. Right. That's the limit of the type of analysis or thinking that a computer is capable of doing. Some combination of the two. So the Poe's method of ratiocination, as developed in for example, the Murders on the Rue Morgue, or his tale of the Purloined Letter, really showcase this higher analysis. That is this method of context that takes causal principles as well as intentions into consideration when triangulating in on a solution concept that you're searching for. Very useful for every branch of science and art, and just being a human, thinking about the intentions, good or bad, that govern my life, that I'm a part of, or I will choose to not be, depending on my ignorance or knowledge of those same causal principles shaping my world. So it's very important. Now, there's one particular tale that you guys had on the screen just now, called Inspector Dupin's investigation of the murder of Marie Roget. And that tale opened the door to a big set of discoveries I didn't expect to make. And it basically, it's one of the 3 tales which Poe makes very clear. I think he wrote this in 1841 or 42. It took place in the fictional tale in France, in Paris, the murder of a young girl who worked at a perfume shop named Marie Roget. And at the beginning of this story, Poe says this is actually directly taken from the actual murder of a girl who I knew, named Mary Cecilia Rogers. in New York, and she worked at a cigar emporium, John Anderson's Cigar Emporium in New York, right in the middle of Printers, what's called the Printers Street, where all of the new press agencies were all based right there. And the more I looked into the actual murder of the girl and the girl herself, who was she? Mm-hmm. How did she know Poe? What family was she a part of when she was murdered, and what was the nature of her murder? I was like, this is full of amazing anomalies that nobody has addressed. Like the fact that her body showed up. 3 days after she disappeared, they found her body right outside of a place in Hoboken, New Jersey, called Sybil's Cave, Sibyl, Sybil's Cave, right next to it's in a little area owned by the Stevens family, the Stevens clan, which was the patriarch of the clan was Colonel John Stevens. And
it was in Hoboken, you said?
Yeah, right across the Hudson River.
Yeah, no, right near where I grew up, actually.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I grew up in Inglewood Cliffs, New Jersey, so it's pretty close. Yeah, I was just curious if I might have known that, but okay.
Well, right there is the Gothic entrance to Sybil's Cave today. Okay. At the time it was set up by the John Stevens III, who's celebrated as an inventor, though just like Tesla, the more I look into it, the more I get a sense that the inventions that he acquired and made vast wealth out of, that he pretty much owned most of Hoboken at a certain point, him and his family, seems to have been, I'm getting the smell of plagiarism and theft from actual scientists and inventors who actually discovered the steam engine, the train steam engine, other things before him, and somehow he got access to the patents and controls because of his devotion to certain forces that were in the middle of carrying out a purge of American. Yeah, that's a picture of John Stevens right there. And so right above the Sybil's Cave is the Stevens Castle. It was actually a Gothic style castle that he built for himself and his family. Right around the cave was a tourist attraction. People from New York would go travel to the Sybil's Cave on weekends and get some of the fountain water. That's a picture of his castle, part of it, or the entryway into his castle. Right outside of it was an area that he refurbished called the Elysian Fields outside of Sybil's Cave. And the cave itself had a natural spring underneath it that gave, that people paid money to drink the medicinal water. And there's not a lot of information, but I found it weird that would be the location where her body would be found. In a very weird ritualistic murder. Like not only was she strangled to death, her womb was brutalized, her abdomen was really cut open. There were signs of heavy abuse, beating. So the fact that the common consensus that people who have looked into it a lot, like people have devoted careers to the study of her murder. It's lame because all they could say is, well, it was a botched abortion attempt. That's all that they say. And then move on. Nothing more to see. There was a botched abortion. And it's like, that's not what happens. You don't get strangled to death. And you don't get that level of mutilation in your abdomen and everything else if it's just a botched abortion. There's something else going on. And then her fiance, who's also partially, another way to explain it is that her fiance killed her, some say. That's another popular explanation, named David Payne. But then the thing that's weird there is that David Payne, who was her fiance, he also ends up dying 2 months later on the same day that Poe ends up dying a decade later. David Payne is found, dead of some self-administered poison with a note saying, "I've wasted my life," blah, 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 at Sybil's Cave. He died. He's dead at Sybil's Cave again. And you're like, what the hell is going on? So that put me on a whole, deep dive that manifested in like 3 chapters of this book unexpectedly of like, well, why is it Sybil's Cave? Where does it get that name? And that name was taken from the Apennine Sibyl that was, as far as I could tell, the earliest accounts of there being an 11th Sibyl of the ancient world. There was 10 known Sibyls of documented by Aeneas in the story of the origins of Troy, or the origins of Rome, I should say. And Ovid, and there's a variety of scholars of the ancient world who talked about the 10 Sibyls. The Delphic Sibyl is one of them at Apollo, but there was the Cumaean Sibyl, the 10th, I think she's the 7th Sibyl. But there was the 11th Sibyl called the Apennine Sibyl, who was based in the Apennine Mountains at the Sibyl Cave at the peak of one of the major Apennine Mountains above the town of Nursia, which was excommunicated for witchcraft. The whole town was excommunicated twice. During the 15th century. It was known even today when you go to the Apennine Sibyl's tourist website, it still exists, although you can't get into the thing because of a few earthquakes that took the entrance down back in the 60s. But below it is the Elysian Fields. That's a place that in Greek and Roman literature, ancient Greek and Roman literature is the place where the heroes would be rewarded. The great heroes would be rewarded in Hades, in the Elysian Fields, with infinite hedonism forever. So that's a strange name that they gave this Elysian Fields below the inside of the cave. She's also the Apennine Sibyl, is the queen of the fairies. The Sibyls are the oracles. Who people would pay a lot of money to get a sense of what the gods want them to do, or it's like going to a seer or a medium. There's Pilate's Lake at the Apennine Sibyl as well. So this is a lake that got its name because apparently that's the burial site for Pontius Pilate, the guy who oversaw the murder of Jesus, which is why it also became a sacred site for occult pilgrims who would do like a pilgrimage to that area. It was also, as they say on their tourist website, it was a domain of black magic where the Templars, the persecuted Cathars, received sanctuary for many, many centuries after the 13th and 14th, or the 14th century crackdown on the Templars, because they were, worshiping Baphomet and stuff. So that became an occult zone where a lot of Manichaean black magic and rituals was practiced. Again, the fact that Pontius Pilate's body was there, it also became sacred for that reason. And the Rosicrucians apparently also have their origin there as well. So there's even within the Apennine Sibyl cave entrance in Nursia, which is also above the hometown where Saint Benedict and his twin sister Scholastica were born in the late 5th century. They're the founders of the Benedictine order and the Order of Sacred Virgins, aka nuns. That's Saint Scholastica. They were born in the town of Nursia. So there's signs that it's an occult center that goes back quite some ways. Even I think the earliest accounts is in about 50 BC is the earliest known accounts of that being a center where leading Roman generals would go and carry out sacrifice to receive messages from the gods. So the Rosicrucians, even now, there's Rosicrucian markings within the cave. There's the date of, Christian Rosenkreuz's pseudo-fictional character. His mythical birthday is carved in 1347 or something in the cave. And again, there's no evidence that he even existed as a person. He's probably a chimera or some composite character created later on. But this became a new sort of rebranded version for the Templars that went underground after they were persecuted, and I think rightfully so. And a lot of their newer incarnations in the 17th, 18th centuries that began penetrating the English courts, the various courts of Europe, through the Scottish Rite, which again, the Scottish Rite is a conduit for the occult. The most virulent form of Masonry is found through the Scottish Rite. That was set up largely by Robert the Bruce, who became a patron of the Templars when they went underground to Scotland, hence Scottish Rite. And so that became a renewed worshiping of, you know, light and darkness, very Manichaean, right? So you're stoic in the day, you worship Apollo in the day, then at night you let out your inner demons, your inner animal instincts, and you have, you know, orgies and drugs at night under Dionysius or Bacchus or some combination. So that sort of like schizo light darkness thing is part of their ritual. You know, go to extremes like that. Anyway, this became what sort of took it, expressed itself in the form of multi-generational witch covens as well. So a lot of these towns were practicing witchcraft. That's part of the reason why Pope Piccolomini and Nicholas of Cusa. So Piccolomini became Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini became Pope Pius the second, who was a good pope, one of the few. Every time you tend to have a good pope, they end up getting poisoned. They don't live very long, but they're there. So it shows you that there's a battle within the Catholic Church too. And he excommunicated like a few towns all around this Apennine Sibyl zone because of witchcraft. And so part of this, the witch covens and these secret societies, because they need these orgiastic women to feel like they're getting empowered by expressing spiritual, sexual energy and transmitting messages from the beyond, usually with the help of some narcotics or ergot, you know, wheat blight or opiates or whatever. There's a variety of hallucinogenics that help that spiritual process, and it's kind of like an MK Ultra thing. The Hellfire Club became one conduit of it in the 18th century. And it had little hives built up all in the New England colonies. This is what people like Cotton Mather were trying to deal with. They were everywhere. It's not like today's like Mary Abramovich is a new thing, right? It's like this was back then too. Just like today that the witch revival is just a little bit more in our face now, but it was always there. And so I'm actually developing a little bit more. I think that it was bad what the Inquisition did. And I think it was a lot of bad things happened attacking women for being, you know, witches when they really were innocent. But that being said, there really were a lot of like witch covens doing really bad human sacrifice and other things. That was a thing too. Yeah. So here's the thing with Mary Cecilia Rogers. Turns out she's a Mather. So she's the great granddaughter of Cotton Mather and Cotton Mather's father, not Wisdom Mather. Doesn't matter. But basically the fathers of the of Massachusetts and the entire Republican spirit in the colonies, that's these guys. These guys were the ones who were self-aware when they were carrying on the project of Piccolomini and Nicholas of Cusa, who had earlier carried on this fight against witchcraft in Europe. They were simultaneously establishing the foundations for the modern sovereign nation state, Cusa and Pius II, around the idea that no, kings and laws, like the idea of laws of nations, should be based upon the common good, the consent of the governed. That originated with Pius II and Cusa, so it was both positing something good as well as fighting against the evil at the same time. And that's what Cotton Mather, John Winthrop, all of these guys were also doing, setting the foundation for what would then later on blossom in the form of the 1776 fight. Increase Mather, thank you. So in my research, I was like, oh, damn, this girl who gets ritualistically murdered at Sybil's Cave in Hoboken, New Jersey is a direct descendant, actually the last of an entire branch of the family tree of Cotton Mather. And her father, Ezra Mather, or actually, I'm quite convinced that her father was Ezra Mather. Even though they say it's her grandfather, I think it was actually her father. There's a lot of evidence that that's the case. He died at a very young age. All of her siblings died before they had any kids. So she was like the last. And when she died, that cut off the whole branch. So there seems to have been a certain element of multi-generational revenge going on there. And so one thing as well that you come to discover is that a lot of scholars had noted that her murder was sort of the first media sensationalized murder that gripped the minds of an entire of the American people, and Europeans were also following her murder. It was like carried out in a very different way than any type of media coverage of such a thing ever before. And the type of murder, the way it was covered, the effect it had psychologically, in terms of shaping the zeitgeist and the mass thinking was a real precursor to the Jack the Ripper murders. The type of, sensationalism. I mean, it gripped. That's all people could talk about was Maria Cecilia's murder for months and months and months. So it had a huge psychological mass trauma in the mind of the people, just the same way that the Jack the Ripper murders at Whitechapel in 1888 had a similar effect. And that was the next time we saw something like that. So I'm going to actually just stop, and I'll throw it back at you if you have any, because I feel like that's my context. That's what brought me into now looking at Jack the Ripper. I don't know if that satisfied the question.
Yeah, no, it definitely did. There was a lot there. I do have one question about just because you were saying that the Mathers were kind of the ones who brought the notion that the United States was really predicated upon this idea of, the Republican form of government. I'm guessing, the spirit of the inalienable rights and endowed by our Creator, that our Declaration of Independence, codified. I'm wondering if they had any influence of, you had also brought up Scottish with Scottish Rite, which they were kind of the darker forces. But then there's the Scottish common sense realism branch of the Enlightenment, which I know a lot of our founding fathers, like people, I know there's a whole movement right now to blame the Enlightenment for all the problems that we see today, that they're like the progenitors of the liberal movement. But really, when you look at like the founding documents of the United States, it was actually the Scottish common sense realism that they were mostly inspired by. It wasn't the counter-Enlightenment movement. It wasn't the French Enlightenment. It wasn't the German Enlightenment. It was really, Thomas Reed, Beatty, Oswald, and, these people who were, a lot of, like Reed in particular, was trying to box out Descartes. This whole, cogito ergo sum idea of which is, looks like kind of just the early stages of codifying mentalism. This idea that it's all in the mind, and I think he was a wizard, but so I'm just curious if they had any influence, if there was any connection there. What?
No, I think he was a wizard. It's like just the way you threw it out there. It's like, yeah, yeah, he was a Rosicrucian witch. Yes, I think so too. Which is usually like, if you want to create, I forget who said this, but if you want to create a superstitious occultist, first make a radical empiricist. So if you can get somebody into a mental framework where they just believe in imposing mental categories in a very formal, linear fashion onto the universe, and that all they believe that they can know is information coming in from the senses, and that's what your mind is limited to doing, well, then for every time you encounter something that can't be explained that way, which is like most of anything that's important cannot be accounted for that way, you have to then make a leap into mysticism, devoid of reason. And then bam, you've got a Rosicrucian freak or some occultist who thinks you can, like, you gotta sacrifice a puppy on the third, full moon of the new year, blah, 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 to get something. So yeah, I think that you're right. Like every country has, every country, every multi-generational institution has, not every, but most that are viable have different aspects to them. And if you look at, for sure, like William Wallace, that is a real lover of freedom, and his allies, what they created was a real disruptive, positive burst of something that was awoken in the heart of the Scottish people that they still they haven't fully been able to smother that. People like Robbie Burns came out of that. He didn't come out of the I guess you could say the Robert the Bruce tradition of traitors, occultist traitors, that had a very different, more house slave relationship to the British. People like James, a lot of the Stuarts, unfortunately, were also big into the occult. James I, James II were big occultists who had Rosicrucian advisors like Robert the Flood, John Dee, and Francis Bacon. But you had this other thing as well that represented a much more healthy human tradition within England, within Scotland, represented by people like Erasmus and Thomas More, later on Shakespeare. who were fighting against and exposing the methodologies of the occult agencies that were corrupting both the people as a whole, but also the intelligentsia, the elites were being corrupted into this. And there's a battle over the hearts and minds of England and Scotland and what they would be. And that reflected itself throughout the United States to the present. It's this battle. And I think that's also the way to discern where you have lodges that are being used as instruments to carry out a patriotic battle. Because, in the days before internet and telephones and other things, and you need to keep things secret if you're going to be able to do conspiracy for good or for bad. You got to keep secret in battle. Yes. Otherwise your enemy is going to destroy you if you show your cards. So lodges became a useful way of coordinating. Oh yeah, there we go. That's John Maynard Keynes and some William Blake paintings of Newton as a solar deity, or a lunar / solar deity. There, I think there's an intentional ambiguity on some of the portrayals of the sun with shade on it. And yeah, Keynes was also a sorcerer witch, a Babylonian witch, and he demonstrated that Newton was a Rosicrucian witch too, when he bought up Newton's chest. So this is all part of what was taking over England when they created the Royal Society. The Invisible College was being built up around that time. That became a conduit, right, for this whole thing. And so in America, yeah, that was, you had some founding fathers that were traitors, were always loyal to that esoteric underground and worked to subvert the republic from within. Oh, that's a good book.
Very similar.
I never read that book.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah. Okay. I'll write it down. Also. Okay. Yeah.
Cambridge
Hand. So yeah. What's that?
Oh, you got the title, but go on. Yeah. I'll give it to you after. There you go.
Western Mysticism and
the Cambridge Handbook, edited by Glenn Alexander McGee. He wrote the Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition, which is also a really great book.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, these guys are all, so from what I could see, right, they're all basically reviving the Hermetic doctrine of Hermes Trismegistus.
Yes.
Who again is kind of like the pseudo mythical character, like Christian Rosenkreutz. And some of these so-called adepts believe that he's as old, or goes back to the time of Abraham, and he was the initiator of Abraham into the mysteries, and but the evidence actually just shows that it was a character who was a sorcerer of some sort with influence from Egypt, writing in the 1st or maybe 2nd century AD. And a lot of the Neoplatonists that you and I have talked about were actually Hermeticists that were tied very closely to the Temple of Isis and Serapis, which was sort of the Roman version of the cult of Isis in Rome. Also had a branch in Greece, a very powerful branch, the library at the Plato's Academy, which it had taken over after Plato died about a century later. These Hermeticists or proto-Hermeticists took over his academy. They're just sorcerers. That's all they are. Yes. And they're organizing the seeding and growth of cults, initiatory mystery cults in various parts of the world, especially at that time it was Rome. And Simon the Magi, Simon the sorcerer, who's recounted in the Bible, was an adept from Samaria who had a whole following and seemed to have been very closely aligned with these Hermetic priests, and was trying to sort of wrap a little bit of a Christian veneer around
that's how they smuggle it in. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and he was exposed by Peter, and it's always the same. Yeah, because nobody would take it in if the devil just said, "Hey, let me in the house. I'm the devil." It'd be like, "No, stay away." But if it looks like something you trust, you'll be more inclined to let it in. So that's what Simon the Magi, who sort of codified the more, I guess you could say, the more modern, the worst aspects of Kabbalism were codified by Simon the Magi, that were utilized and revived in a serious way by the Rosicrucians, and then taken further by the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, and the people like Crowley, who were also part of the Hermetic Order.
What years was Magi? I'm sorry, just around what time was that?
He's around, I would say probably around 60, 50 or no, 50 Common Era, I guess, thereabouts. Because he was actually, no, well, it was during the time of Nero. So he was Nero's favorite court sorcerer. So when was Nero the emperor. That we're talking here. Well, that's a painting from the 12th century you have there of Nero and Simon the Magi and St. Peter. Nero, I think, was he's the guy who oversaw the murder of Peter, who was crucified upside down.
He was born December 1537 and he died June 968. So that's according to Wikipedia.
960. Well, here, let's just go quickly here and
AD 68.
I'll just tell you.
AD, okay.
60. Okay, so it was around that time. That's when Simon the Magi was active. And there were other mystery cults acting Christian but trying to subvert it from within, like the cult of the Valentinian, the followers of Valentinius, or Basilides, who Carl Jung later on said that he was channeling Basilides, or Marcion was another brand, but they're all doing the same thing. They're all basically the cults of Sybil, Attis, Isis, Serapis, Mithra, that are just sort of rebranding and subverting the thing from within. And it was a victory for the good guys, so to speak. I hate talking good guy, bad guy, but there are good guys and bad guys, in the form of the shutdown of the cults. So they were legalized finally, and they couldn't operate anymore around the end of the 4th century, early 5th century. And you had the Sibylline oracles, the Sibylline books that were burnt by Stilicho, the advisor to Theodosius II. You had the shutdown of the Neoplatonic Library of Alexandria at the time, which had been completely dominated. There's probably a lot of really good books. It's a shame that so much got destroyed, but at the same time, it became sort of a headquarters, kind of like the Council on Foreign Relations or something, coordinating all of these mystery cults. So, I guess I understand why now, or at least I appreciate the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. I could see it's not just a one-dimensional thing for me anymore. Kind of like what we were saying with the witchcraft stuff and the Inquisition. I can understand it, even though I don't think that it was done right. But all of this stuff was when it was really crushed, a lot of it just had to take on either veneers within new orders that were seeded, like the cult of the Archangel Michael that was created around 520, around the same period that the library that the Neoplatonic Academy was annihilated, as well as the Benedictine order, which itself very, very creepy with exoteric and esoteric teaching practices for the inner elites versus those who would think that the Bible was something that they had to respect, which was the majority of members. But the initiated members, like any Gnostic cult, knew they came to the discovery that the God you thought you were reading about in the Bible, who expects you to do good and expects you to believe in a one God instead of many gods, that's actually an evil God that they said is Yaldabaoth. And that Yaldabaoth is the evil aborted monstrosity created by Pistis Sophia, who had sex with herself and had this androgynous self-relationship and produced this beast who created the world and the physical world in his own image within 6 days or something, and everything thus becomes evil, made in the image of Yaldabaoth, the stupid, evil, ignorant god,
the demiurge,
even our conscience and the demiurge. Yeah.
It's
so
interesting.
They create
it was interesting though about the Archangel Michael. I didn't know he was a relatively late invention. Fetzer, John Fetzer, who created Cassell, social emotional learning. He believed that he could channel the Archangel Michael, and he said that the purpose of doing that would be to usher in the age of Aquarius. And
that's a big one. Yeah, Archangel Michael preceded the cult of Archangel Michael. So that's the thing. So there was already like a figure in religious texts of the Archangel Michael within sacred stories. However, turning it into the cult as we see it with the angel with the spear on the dragon, putting his foot on the dragon and killing it. Yeah. That became as a new institution. It was a rebranded new institution that served to replace the cult of Mithra, where formerly had a representative of the god Helios killing the bull in the Mithraic cults.
Yes,
and the the figure was looking over to Helios, the solar deity, while he was killing the bull, and there was like the snake was there, the dog was there biting the bull. And then when Mithra, the cult of Mithra, which was a warrior cult, it was a cult of all the legionnaires, the Praetorian Guard. They were all members of the male only cult of Mithra. So when that got shut down in its outward form, it took on new things, new incarnations. One of those conduits that had to express that same crusader warrior mentality of righteously fighting evil, which seems to be, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with righteously fighting evil. That's what I think we're doing. But there's a way of doing it in a foolish manner, where it becomes useful for making people run into battle without understanding whether they're possibly the instruments of evil, because they think that the other that they're going to do battle with is the devil that has to be destroyed. But they don't bother taking the time to think, are they actually maybe the baddies? So if you look at the way the Benedictines were able to utilize and co-opt this, especially through the creation of the Templars, because the Templars were created as a sub-Benedictine order. The Priory of Zion as well, which does seem to be an aspect of this, was also, they were co-joined together. The Templars were the mercenary branch of this priory that was created by people like the Bernard de Clairvaux, his teacher, as well, who were creating these new synthetic warrior cults that would then be used to usher in the new age of crusades, of forever wars between the Christian world and the Jews and the Muslims. So the first crusade saw massive Jews massacred along the way. Like whole towns of Jews were massacred by these crusading Christian idiots from like France and England, but mostly France at the time, that were then, sent in to reclaim the Holy Land. And the Templars were actually known as the Knights of Solomon's Temple, or the poor Knights of Solomon's Temple. And they were devoted to the idea of reconstructing Solomon's Temple for the third time, the way that Julian the Apostate also had tried to do in 360. He's the guy who tried to, he did the last real serious effort to revive the mystery cults at that time. He's actually somebody who's really, really praised highly today by the Aleister Crowleyites, Carl Jung, all of the high level controllers of today's occult epicenters love Julian the Apostate so much. So that was this whole Solomon's Temple thing that the Templars were also in the midst of trying to revive. They were basically working with the Knights Hospitaller that were created around the same time, also as a subcult of the Benedictines, and very, again, with a mystery initiatory set of degrees baked into their system. One represented a left hand, the other hand a right hand path. So one utilized the masculine energy of penetration and imposition of will, while the other one utilized, this feminine energy of sucking in, embracing, and then subverting, from the left hand path. People want to get a sense of this, they could just watch Da Vinci Code. That's a simplistic way, a diluted but truthful way of getting a sense of how this thing plays out. Right. That what was just shown there was a logo that was created for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. On the left is actually a logo from the Order of the Franciscans, which was another, which was also created around 1209, along at the same time. These things are always created not individually, but they're always co-created with another a controlled opposition. They always create left hand, right hand, male, female sort of organizations at the same time. Was that
dialectics?
Dialectics. Oh, always. Yes. So in this case, the Franciscans were co-created with the Dominicans around the exact same time after the Fourth Crusade was over, and that's when Venice sort of had its maximum control over the maritime, banking, global control networks. That was Venice's sort of takeover, was this Fourth Crusade, where they destroyed Constantinople, using the Crusaders, the Hospitallers. That's right, a picture of Dominic de Guzman and Francis of Assisi. They were buddies, co-creating two orders. Both of them ran the Inquisitions. So they were... One was like, Gaia cult, talk to animals, feminine energy stuff, everything is equally sacred. Birds and worms are as equally sacred as a human baby. So that's why we should be like, giving sermons to trees and worms as much as to humans, while the other one, de Guzman, Dominicans, were much more like patriarchal, aggressive patriarchal types who are just like, let's like their motto is, or their mascot that they officially have is a dog with a torch in its mouth, with the idea that they're the dogs of God who will burn the world with the righteousness of Jesus. But it's very like pert, scorched earth type stuff. And you see that what they did in all of the different Inquisition operations that were seated around Europe, which did a lot more damage than good, I would say. So, and then it creates a necessary, by carrying out that type of iron fist brutality against everybody who you say is heretical. You wipe out a lot of innocent people along the way, and then you create a feeling of injustice and hate for the authorities of the church that result in people going all Luciferian, thinking that they're now like fighting for truth, and then you create more witches. So it's this recipe for forever, wars. And all that to say, that's what the role of Solomon's Temple. It's good that we're actually going through this, because this also plays a big role in the Jack the Ripper story.
Yeah.
As it came out, and I'll show a little image here. I'll do a share screen, because I do want to show this thing that caught my eye when I began looking into Jack the Ripper. Can you guys see this my screen yet?
No, I think yep.
You see it?
Oh, there we go. Yes.
Okay, good. So that's the first part of that's. It's actually, like I said, it's part 13, but it's actually part 1 of the Jack the Ripper thing. And if people go there, they can access part 2, part 3, 4, 5, 6, which completes that story. And the thing that caught my eye is that the position of the murders, the 5 what are known as the 5 canon victims of the Whitechapel killer, because there's other murders, but they fell out of a certain methodology of there's a certain like modus operandi of these 5 particular ones that all scholars recognize were done by using a similar technique. So these are known as the 5 canon victims. And if you look at the position of where their bodies were located over the course of the 7 weeks while the murders were occurring, it forms the Vesica Pisces. And here's like the actual distances of victim 1 to victim 2. So you have 930 yards, victim 2 to victim 4, 930 yards, victim 3 to 4, 950 yards, 3 to 5, 950 yards. And then from the center of the planted site 3 is 500, 500, 500. So there's definitely a non-randomness factor there, right? And you're like, well, why the Vesica Pisces, which is basically any shape created with the overlapping of two circles, right? So anytime you have that. So I began looking a little bit at like, what is the Vesica Pisces? So what meaning does that have? And sure enough, for Rosicrucians and occultists, it has high value. It by itself is neutral. Like geometrically, it's simply it's a very natural, beautifully, aesthetically symmetrical and pleasing shape, right? Nothing bad about it per se.
Right.
But its name came from the Vesica Pisces, otherwise means the womb, or the Pisces part is the fish. So it became a representation for the symbol of Jesus. So there's a lot of imagery of the Vesica within a lot of, especially medieval renditions of Jesus, or in the case, often Mary, because, female womb of Jesus. It became something that we see in a lot of paintings and a lot of sculptures of Christian iconography. We also see it in other religious sacred iconography too, within Buddhism, within Hinduism, within a variety of other sects. Here's just a few samplings of its appearance. Again, often refers to sex, but it also means the womb, the wound, like the womb or the wound. It has an interchangeable meaning, so it often means both like sex, birth, creation, as well as death. The wound of Christ, where the spear pierced him. So it has that dual meaning. And the thing about occultists, one of the formulas, they want to integrate moral and intellectual opposites in a very unnatural way. So like creation, destruction, death, murder, and sex and love, hate and love. Like they always try to integrate these things, and and I think kind of makes the initiate kind of schizophrenic along the way. Like there's it's just not evil and good. It's two sides of the same thing, you know. Maybe good, evil is good because you know God created evil, so he must want evil. So thus, evil and good is so to know God, you have to do evil. You know, so you get these weird syllogisms, and it gets people into a bad headspace. And so that was an anomaly.
I think that's intentional, so that they can create their synthesis or synthetic reality. You know, through it's essentially the Alphaben process. But yeah, it is always these two dialectical poles that they infuse together, right? The order out of chaos is the Freemason slogan, but it goes
always,
always,
yeah. So that began my research into some of the Vesco, you know, aspects, how it's interpreted. I mean, the very architecture of the famous symbol of Freemasonry also is found from the Vesca Pisces that involve the creation of or the positioning of a square, as well as the square root of 5. So the square root of 2 and the square root of 5 coexistent. That's generated very simply from the Vesica. Again, not a bad thing. You got the tree of life within the Vesica. You got, you know, within it, the square root of 3, square root of 2, square root of 5. Again, it's like anybody who's doing a healthy exploration of constructive geometry must go through this analysis. It's not mystical. It's not like a cult. It's just like a beautiful set of discoveries that anyone should be allowed to make, right? In a reasonable way. But the oligarchy wants to co-opt it and infuse like magical meaning into all of these things, like the Pentagon, you know, which is just part of what you would need to build if you were going to explore the golden section or the Fibonacci sequence. Like any student in a healthy education system should be exploring these things. You don't have to like sacrifice animals or humans, you know, around a pentacle or something. So
you should be able to study geometry without having to do black magic rituals with it.
You know? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, this is like just some of the elements of the infusion that the oligarchy, especially the Theosophists, are always looking at, like forcing these opposites. So they like certain traditions within Hinduism, like the Shakti Shiva cult, which involves, you know, a warrior spirit at night and a more stoic spirit in the day, a male and a feminine that coexist together. And you know, you have things like the expression of the Vesca Pisces in the architecture of St. Peter's Square, right? At St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, which has an additional. So you have the womb represented there, and you have the phallus symbol of the male, you know, the penis thing there that's brought in from Egypt. And people don't often wonder, like, well, why is that in Rome? You know, overseeing St. Peter's Basilica. You know, it's like but it's there, and that was brought there by I forget which emperor, but that was I think around Emperor Claudius or something who brought that in already 2,000 years ago. And then you had a Neoplatonist artist who positioned the actual phallic who positioned the phallic object and designed the Vesca in 1560. And then they got the same thing in Washington. So around the same time that you had this occult takeover of American Masonic lodges, that's when the 1840 or so was when the Washington Monument was built. And even at the time, like you read the writings of people who were alive during those days, and everyone was confused when there was a big contest over like who could come up with a design in memory of George Washington. There was a big contest, and all of the artists were putting out their different designs. But everyone was wondering why did this guy win? Like, weren't we supposed to do like a statue of Washington? So it was really confusing. And then in 2004, somebody went and added the Vesca Pisces around it as well to again add the male feminine combo.
It was that late. Interesting.
Yeah. The Vesca Pisces, it took a while for them to bring that into Washington. I don't know why. So back to Jack the Ripper. That was the first set of anomalies that caught my eye. The second because I had been looking, like I mentioned it, the works of the role of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the person, but also his efforts to sabotage the works of Edgar Poe through the creation of Sherlock Holmes, who's this opium addicted cocaine addict who's using some mixture of deductive and inductive hyper logic while at the same time leaping to these impossible solution concepts to his problems that no human reason could possibly do. It's like Wolverine smelling bubblegum and having super senses, knowing exactly who killed this girl 18 years ago because of, some particular brand of bubblegum. And it's just the mind doesn't work that way. So there's a subversion of humans understanding like how our minds are actually supposed to work, which you could get if you really use Poe's method of ratiocination. It's the very opposite of what Sherlock Holmes does. And so, I was thinking about it from that standpoint. And one thing that caught my eye, and I forget which book I was reading, brought up how the character of Sherlock Holmes lives in a place in Baker Street, which happened to be like adjacent on the same block, even like one house next to the Pompadour Cosmetics Company, which the more I looked into this, it was actually three black magicians, two witches and a sorcerer who lived there and worked there immediately after the Jack the Ripper murders were over. One of them was named here, let's go get them. Pull it down here. There we go. So one of them was Mabel Collins, who was a disciple of Madame Blavatsky. She wrote several very influential theosophical tracts between 1885 and 1890. Another one was Baroness Victoria Kremers, who was married to a Russian aristocrat. And both of them were members of Blavatsky's esoteric section that was created in 1888 and involved most every leading member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, actually, in this esoteric section. So they teamed up as two witches who were both channelers with and they were both actually, Collins was a co-founder of Lucifer magazine. That was the official sort of mag for the Theosophists. Yeah.
Yeah. That's Blavatsky's original magazine. Yeah.
Yep. And Kremers was the business manager of Lucifer magazine. Both of them seem to have been taking part in a bit of an overhaul. There was an overhaul of Lucifer magazine, or not, of the Theosophists, that had begun in earnest around 1884 with the release of a report. I think it was called the Hodgson Report, that was overseen by the British Society for Psychical Research, that demonstrated that Blavatsky was actually lying about, materializing teacups and letters from the ascended masters. So Courtenay and forget the other ones, but so she'd actually been lying, and this, and I think what was happening, she was becoming a little bit of what would you say? It was she was too big for her britches. She was, I think, a little bit too compromised. So she was getting caught doing sloppy things that was making the very important Theosophist project, which was created in 1875, largely as an outgrowth of the Transcendentalist movement. So the earlier Transcendentalists that Poe was fighting, Poe did a very good job undermining the Transcendentalists. He did such a good job that I think that they needed to create something new that added a little bit that was lacking from the Transcendentals, like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thoreau. And there's a whole network of these Gnostics who were acting Christian, but they were all actually Gnostics when you read the writings, and pagans. But
they were very. Oh, sorry. I was going to say they were very influential on the Fellowship for the New Life, which is what became the Fabian Society.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's right.
That was a very weird group. Yeah.
Special, yes. And yeah, they were totally, and they were also behind. I mean, the creation of the British Society for Psychical Research was also very, very much inspired by a lot of these Transcendentalists, and there was an overlap the whole time between these different seemingly independent agencies, but they were all different aspects of the same effort by the British Empire to create a new one world religion and a restoration of the old pagan mystery cults around one common control mechanism, which was at the time the British Empire. And I think it still is.
I think so too.
So yeah, Blavatsky was caught, I think, against the wish. I think that you actually had some pretty honest operators who had infiltrated her cult in Adyar in India, by the name of Emma and Peter Coulomb, who were, I believe, tied to the scientist Coulomb. But there were just like in America, you had these patriotic networks around Poe. You had it also later on with Houdini. You had it in France too, like really good people understanding the nature of evil and trying to subvert it, like in battle. So the Coulombs got into the inner trust circle of Blavatsky in Adyar when she'd set up shop there after 1878 or so as a headquarter. And they exposed and made it public, sent it to the French press, all of the proofs that they had that she had trap doors and all of these tricks built into her compound that she would dupe people who would go in. Oh, yeah, that's the Scented Masters, or a picture of an illustration. And they did such a good job that I think that there was damage control. So the paradox for a lot of people is like, why would the British Society for Psychical Research undermine Blavatsky's Theosophy when aren't they two sides of the same thing? And it's like, yeah, they are two sides of the same thing. And that's why but it was damage control. Like it was already out there. They had to take control of the narrative though. So what you had was people like Walter Besant. And this is where people like Sir Walter Besant is a highly influential person. And he worked very closely with King Edward VII. He was the treasurer of the Quatuor Coronati Lodge. Under the president of that lodge was Sir Charles Warren, the guy who was assigned to be the Metropolitan Police Commissioner during the Jack the Ripper killings. That Charles Warren. He was also, yeah. And these guys were both part of the Solomon Temple revival mission. So what had happened was back in 1862 or 1861, when the king dies, his son, who becomes later on King Edward VII, time he's still Albert Edward, Prince of Wales. He becomes the unchallenged global Grand Master of Freemasonry. He's like the top dog. And he unleashes this project. This U.S. Civil War is still raging, right? There's the possibility that the U.S. is going to be undone by this successful British-steered, chaos operation. That's 1862. It wasn't looking good for the Union. So that was a high likelihood. And the king, or the guy who will become king, goes on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, to Syria, to Jerusalem. Gets the Templar cross tattooed on his chest. That's one of the things he does while he's there. And he initiates what's called the Palestinian Expedition Fund. And this becomes run by Sir Charles Warren in 1867. And its purpose is to excavate the Temple Mount, the location of today's Dome on the Rock, a holy site for the Muslims built up around the early 7th century. Strangely overseen by some Egyptian mystics who are Sufi builders who seem to select a very weird site right where the temple had been a holy site for the Jews that had been destroyed twice. That's the site that they picked to build the Dome on the Rock. Just a coincidence. Yeah. And it's also similar initiatory Gnostic mystics masquerading as Muslims who were working with the Templars later on, when the Templars had their headquarters in the caves of Solomon's mines. So that's also where the Templars had their caves. That's where they built up the Holy Sepulchre. That's the headquarters of today's Order of the Holy Sepulchre. There's still about 30,000 knights. And dames, they still exist, centered in Jerusalem, devoted to restoring the kingdom of Jerusalem. They work with the UN, and they actually oversee a lot of the educational institutions in Palestine. It's kind of weird. And that is what, so you had these Ismaili assassins who were these mystic Gnostics, actual pagans working with the Templars at this thing at Solomon's Temple, which they perceive, and the more I read the writings of people like Sir Charles Warren or Aleister Crowley or any of these mystics, they think of Solomon's Temple as the ancient site of pagan mass sacrifice, human sacrifice. So they have this whole theology and belief system that Solomon is actually a composite of Sol and Ammon, so the a lunar and a solar deity infused together. Very again Rosicrucian, where they see Solomon as a high priest of Moloch and Ashtoreth. They believe that Moloch being the god of, the demanded child sacrifice of the firstborns, mostly.
Right.
In furnaces. It's very disgusting, but it was big, 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 big. So that's what they see. They're not thinking of the character in the Old Testament. That there's a different character that they have in mind when they're talking about Solomon and his temple. And they actually believe
not Solomon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's something here that Crowley wrote called the Magical Books of Solomon with the Lesser and Greater Keys. It's actually a useful book to go through just to see how they're thinking about this stuff. And in this particular book I have here is the Testament of Solomon. It's something that was probably written around the 6th century, maybe might have even been medieval. It's so cloudy. But in it basically shows a story that's also there in the Babylonian Talmud too, of the story of Solomon as a demonologist and a necromancer who, from the Archangel Michael, receives a pentagon ring that gives him power over the hordes of Beelzebub and the demons that he then commands, and they serve him as he builds his temple using the demon labor. And the temple then becomes like this, again, mass human sacrifice zone, which when I was reading Sir Richard Burton, not the actor, but the guy who inspired Crowley, who was also excavating the site with Charles Warren. Let me see actually if I have a picture of it here. Probably do. 1 second. Yeah, let me get it. There's a part, I think I have it in part 3. Let's go for part 3. Is where I think I have it. Right. So you see that there? That's the dome on the rock. That's the cave. The reason one of the myths is that the rock under the dome on the rock, there's a big rock there. And under the rock, this is a fact, there's a chamber, a little cavern. It's called the Chamber of Sighs. You can see pictures of it today. And below that, there's another cavern that no one's allowed to see. But apparently, Sir Charles Warren did excavate that starting in between 1867 and 1870. They also revived the Royal Arch Freemasonry ceremonies as well. And they did the first Masonic ceremonies in Solomon's Mines that's right next to this. And they found that there are these shafts in all directions that are spread out like tunnels from this secondary enclave here into the surrounding region around Jerusalem. Huge tunnels. And in Charles Warren's writings, he wrote of his hypothesis of why it exists, where he says here, the discovery of a shaft to the water of the Virgin's fount threw considerable light upon the object of the rock-cut canals about Jerusalem, as proving then, as has been conjectured by some, to have been for conducting away the refuse and blood from the temple. So these guys see the temple as, again, the place where all of the mass, it's like Aztec ceremonies, like you hear these accounts of like 90,000 people being like blood murdered, like bled out to satisfy the gods or whatever, right? Where does that blood go? Where does all the refuse go? And in his mind, he's saying it's all being put down there to be infused into the soil to create this sort of like idea of the blood is where your spirit's located. The soil is where your blood is infusing into. So it creates an identity around a whole people who could be brainwashed to fall into a blood and soil cult, right? Where they will become like zealots and like suicide terrorists to there you go. That's the cave of sighs, or the cavern of sighs. That's also, there's a story there that's similar to the Apennine Sibyl cave, which is that this is where all of the undead spirits of the world go and live in this cavern of size, and you can get in communion. You'll have a higher power of transmitting the dead through special oracles when they're inside these types of locations. I would imagine that the Hoboken Cave in New Jersey is probably a zone where a lot of these rituals have probably been done, I would say. So I got this whole, yeah.
There's an interesting, just it made me think of it when you're talking about that cave. It's called Archetypus, and it's I think I think it's Hoboken. It's either Hoboken or it's somewhere right around there. But anyway, it's Archetypus Cafe. It's a cafe, but it's underground and it's all caves. Like it's like you're sitting in a cave.
Really?
It's called Archetypus.
And you can like go down there and pay money and get a like, coffee.
Actually, they had really good food. It was like the place to go when I was in high school.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot in America. There's a lot of these underground cavern systems where Masonic rituals still take place in Oakland and Kentucky, and they're all over the place. And there's some
Springfield. There's like, the underground tunnels there. Yeah, this is Archetypus.
Oh, that's it right there. No shit. I kind of like to check that out. Actually, that's interesting.
Yeah. So that's what I thought of when you're talking about it. But anyway,
I probably won't order the blood pudding. But there's something similar to like the cult of Mithra, which would always do their rituals in underground Mithraeum, of which there are still like 500 that have been excavated all across Europe and North Africa and the Middle East even today. There's lots of them, and they're always underground. It's sort of a way to express the womb of Gaia. So you're like in a sacred womb when you're underground, and they got this whole, a set of associations around that.
Right.
So yeah. Now the thing with Charles Warren,
yes,
he's like the most decorated commander of Freemasonry, the British Empire. He's like the biggest expert of the Temple Mount excavation thing to rebuild Solomon's Temple. You're like, why would he then be assigned almost like from 1886 to 1888? And he quits hours before the last, I think it's Mary Nichols, I forget which one, but the very last Ripper murder is discovered. He quits like 5 hours before they discover the last body. So why would he be assigned to be the Metropolitan Police Commissioner of all of the things he's done around the world in Africa and, interfacing with, anyways, like, why? So there must be a high level of importance to what the hell happened in Whitechapel. And the last anomaly here that ties into everything I've just said is that a journalist for W.T. Steed's Pall Mall Gazette plays a key role. His name, he comes up a lot in part 2 of my series. That's him right there. Robert Donston Stevenson. And he's a dude who's born to a pretty upper crust British family. Not too much is known about his background so much. He becomes a disciple at a very young age to Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton. Mm-hmm. That's Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton over there. He's also, and that's, like I said, high-level Rosicrucian. He creates the London, it's called the Society Rosicrucianus London, Anglia in 1867. And he initiates him into the dark arts. Right after he becomes an initiate in Lytton's ceremonies, he then is assigned to go to Italy, where he becomes a surgeon. He's trained as a surgeon. And he's now working for about a year in Garibaldi's army. Now, Garibaldi is a disciple of Giuseppe Mazzini, who's also a handler of most of the Transcendentalists. He's a pretty big player.
Yeah.
Margaret Fuller is a follower of Giuseppe Mazzini. She lives with him. He manages
who Albert Pike wrote that famous letter, if he wrote it, but about the 3 World Wars.
Yeah, that one's a fake letter that they infused in there, but there are.
But that's who it was written to. It was Mazzini.
Yeah. Because there really are Pike Mazzini letters, really important Pike Mazzini letters. But what they did is they infused some garbage, fake stuff into it to undermine all of them. So people then throw the baby out with the bathwater. The famous 3 World Wars prophecy thing and the rise of fascism, that was actually hooked up in the 1940s. No evidence of existing before that.
Right.
However, the Pike Mazzini letters, where Pike is like going through Lucifer as our god and going through his line of reasoning of what that's actually, I'm totally convinced that those are real.
I am too.
Yeah. And he says it. You read his Morals and Dogma. It's like it's already in there too. They're not secret about that.
Right.
So, oh yeah, there you go. So that's another person who is also at the same time in Garibaldi's army is Madame Blavatsky. So before she creates the Theosophists, she's actually with Garibaldi. And Garibaldi's like doing all of he's an outgrowth of the Young Europe movement that Mazzini had spun, you know, creating these sort of pseudo Templar occult agencies that have an esoteric and exoteric aspect to it, like Young Albania, young Egypt, even there's young everything, young Germany, young France, young America. Young America in America is actually the transcendentalists. Ralph Waldo Emerson is the founder of Young America Northern Branch, and Albert Pike is a leader of the Young America Southern Branch. Both of them, one is running the abolitionists, the other one's running the slave power. Both of them are equally occult and out to destroy America. So go figure. That's how it works. So you got Giuseppe.
Even today, that's how it works. But yeah.
Yeah. So you got this guy Garibaldi, and by the way, Mazzini becomes like dictator of a triumvirate of Italy for like a year before he's ousted, and he gets sanctuary in England. That's his base of operations for the entire time. So Garibaldi is interfacing with Robert Johnston Stevenson, Madame Blavatsky, both of them. Johnston Stevenson is describing it as one of the most interesting times of his life, where he had to like, you're cutting off limbs with no anesthesia, like it's horrific. And he's like, I got 20 years of experience in 6 months. Blavatsky has like war wounds as well. Apparently she got, that's what she says to Alcott, at least. She talks about how she got nearly killed fighting in Garibaldi's army. And Garibaldi is the founder of the Rite of Memphis and Misraim in 1880. So he's the Grand Master. He's already a Scottish Rite Grand Master, but he becomes the founder, the unifier of the two separate rites. There's one Rite of Memphis, one Misraim, and he infused them together, which Blavatsky becomes an initiated member of the Rite of Memphis and Misraim. Another leader of that. Oh yeah, there you go. That's Young America. Another leader of that becomes John Yarker. John Yarker is the lieutenant of Albert Pike at the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. And Yarker goes and creates, and this is what they always do. They create these little spin-off groups, right? Cutting off the head of a hydra. They constantly do it to themselves. Yep. So they create more spin-off groups, and the Gnostics, the ancient pseudo-Christian Gnostics were doing that. That's where there were thousands of these different subcults in the first 3 centuries AD. They always do this.
I just want to address that for a second, because I think it's so important today, because this is what happens. So they themselves create these splinter groups, and then you'll have these the followers, the disciples, they'll tell you, no, that this is so different. They splintered off. There was all this discrepancy, and they have very different views, and they don't like each other, whatever their grievances are. And they don't understand that the very same people created the same splinter groups, and it all funnels to the end goals. So I think it's really important to drive home, because this is happening today. And I see this all the time. And they're like, no, you can't. You can't just lump them all together. Well, you kind of can, actually. So, but
there's a commonality, like there's a common denominator that you can find amongst all of these things, right?
And there's also common
that's the common denominator is their goal, right? Like it's both their how they worship, or the certain assumptions that they carry into their cosmology, but also that's also directly tied to the objectives that they ultimately want, which is always some form of overthrow of any type of monotheistic moral considerations of God, and the restoration of some ancient, do what thou willst ethos. Usually paganistic, and usually tied to some devaluation of human life to the status of mud in some way, even though it always masquerades with like light and life and big hug and all this good stuff.
Yes.
So the the thing with this Dawson Stevenson guy, I mentioned earlier that he was, oh, that's him right there. Oh, so do a screen share there. Oh yeah, do a screen share. So, after he is, carrying out all sorts of things with, as a surgeon, Garibaldi's army, he bounces around a little bit more. He ends up in India. Oh yeah, that's another picture of Edward Bulwer Lytton with his famous book, The Coming Race, which introduces vril, this stuff that the hereditary initiated elites can interface with in order to have telepathic powers and control robots and stuff with their minds. Also, Zanoni is another Rosicrucian tale that he wrote. Very influential. Reading these books are actually super, super useful. Mm-hmm. This one inspires H.G. Wells, and the War of the Worlds actually directly is taken from this story of this race below Earth that's waiting to take over and destroy humanity and replace us with a superior new race. It actually inspires Blavatsky around her idea of the sixth sub-root race. Yeah. That's supposedly going to emerge out of California as East meets West. And now you're going to have, and this is basically transhumanism. So the Silicon Valley thing is all one giant 6 subroot race thing that Blavatsky put forth, and Leadbeater and others added to the detail. And they created a whole set of, that's why they seeded all of their theosophical temples all over California, is to prepare the groundwork for transhumanism, a bunch of, the next phase of evolution. So again, Bulwer Lytton's works, super important.
Yeah.
The evil, the Theatre de Chaldin Noosphere. That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole other thing, because there's actually, in my analysis, there's 2 different schools of people who've been battling over what the noosphere means. Mm-hmm. And there's one school that I agree with around this figure of Vladimir Vernadsky, who is an enemy of Chaldin. But both of them talked about the noosphere because it exists. It's simply the domain of human cognition that shapes matter and energy by intentions and reason. And it's everything around me doesn't come from, I didn't pick these books off of the tree, right? It's it's all the effects of discoveries applied in the form of, each book, it's discoveries in paper making, printing, electricity, so many discoveries. And so it's true. The more you discover, the more the universe resonates to our needs and our intentions. And that can be good if you're moral. Mm-hmm. And so we can have more of us at a higher quality of life. And that's cool. Mm-hmm. So that's the type of noosphere that I can get behind, is the Vernadsky type. But then again, his enemies around Chaldin and that whole group, which also is very active amongst the cultists in Russia around cosmists. There's a sick version of it too, which is very transhumanistic-y. And that's based on anyway. But so all that to say,
yes, sorry.
he ends up in Jerusalem. So Robert Dawson Stevenson and Charles Warren become friends starting in 1868. And he's working now for W.T. Stead's Pall Mall Gazette, covering the excavation of Solomon's Temple, and becoming a lifelong friend 20 years before Jack the Ripper murders happen with Warren in Jerusalem. So this guy, he's close friends with Stead. He's close friends with the Pall Mall Gazette. Well, Stead comes in later, actually, but the Pall Mall Gazette is first. And then he's in India at the same time, because the way he got to know Edward Bulwer Lytton is through Bulwer Lytton's son. So this is Bulwer Lytton had a son who was viceroy of India, the governor general and viceroy of India between 1876 and 1880. And his name was Sir Robert Bulwer Lytton, Lord Robert Bulwer Lytton, sorry. And let me see if I can find a picture of him. I think I can. It's probably here. There it is. Okay. That's Edward Bulwer Lytton's son and a childhood friend of Robert Dawson Stevenson, Lord Robert Bulwer Lytton, Viceroy of India, overseeing the worst controlled famine of India, total genocide of 10 million people that he oversaw to celebrate Queen Victoria's Jubilee or something. Now, it was at this time that he's there when Blavatsky and Olcott are going to India, getting full access to every Indian prince, every Brahmin leader. They have total access, red carpet. You're like, how did they get such access?
Right.
And I think that it's because of this guy that everything was made easy for them, right? The other thing is that Donstan Stevenson goes to India and lives as the guest of honor with Lord Lytton for almost a year, doing black magic together, all sorts of weird shit, a lot of tantric black magic, especially, I'm sure, is what they're actually doing.
Right.
This is like 1878 or so. And you have really this new world religion taking form. It's like a synthesis of all of the common black magic rituals you find in Asia, especially in India, in Egypt, in the Hermetic traditions, in Gnosticism. So they're just trying to take a smorgasbord of everything and pull out the it's like the perennial philosophy of Aldous Huxley kind of, but the esoteric version of it.
Right.
And this guy ends up going back to England, and when he is in, sorry, let me just go back to it here.
Well, you're finding that you saw, I think Matthew Crawford emailed all of us to say that it was Mary Lytton, who's the granddaughter of Edward Bulwer Lytton, who wrote Krishnamurti's biography.
Yeah, and her mom was like friends very closely and hosted Krishnamurti as well for a long time. Yeah, absolutely. This whole family is super deep into Krishnamurti land. And Bulwer Lytton's son. There's several generations of high-level managers of the empire. It's Zanoni, the Rosicrucian tale. So this guy, Donstan Stevenson, with all of his associations, he ends up becoming, as I mentioned, there was a sorcerer and two witches that ran Pompadour Cosmetics. He's the sorcerer who's like in bed with these two witches who are part of the esoteric section of Blavatsky's Theosophical Lodge. The esoteric section just being simply that the Theosophists in around 1888, when Blavatsky was now replaced by, there was a motion, but I think that the figure who was leading this most clearly was Walter Besant, Sir Walter Besant, who was largely the brother-in-law of Annie Besant. And he was a handler and a sponsor of her even before she became a Fabian. So when she was still a socialist Fabian eugenicist, before she even met Blavatsky or knew of Theosophy, he was already like her sponsor as she'd even though she divorced his brother. So you got this character who's very close to King Edward VII, working as the treasurer of the Quattuor Coronati Lodge under Charles Warren, who's managing the overhaul of the Theosophists to replace Blavatsky, who's too compromised with somebody a little bit more controlled, a little bit more handleable. And Besant becomes the person that they select to do that job. And so you have this thing going on, and while this is happening, you have let's just go back to it again. You have a bunch of Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn members, all of the founders, including what's his name? I'll just get him. Woodman. So you have here. Let me just get number. Here. These are some important characters.
So many names.
Yeah, I know, but there's not too many. There's still a limited amount, so it's the mind can still wrap it around this stuff.
Okay.
You have here William Wynne Westcott, who's one of the three co-founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So 1888, this thing is created. This created in 1887. They create their Isis Urania Lodge in 1888. The esoteric section is created about a month before during the Jack the Ripper murders. William Wynne Westcott is the London coroner overseeing the Jack the Ripper murders too, interfacing closely with Charles Warren. That's a picture of John Yarker and Pike. The other two are MacGregor Mathers, the guy who grooms Aleister Crowley in the Golden Dawn. The other guy here is William Robert Woodman. They're all members of the esoteric section, and Blavatsky's of the view that the Theosophists are too theory-based, and they need to become more. They need a club that can do more practical magic. And so that'll has to be kept secret. Now, among the members of the esoteric section are all of these guys and more. You have Mabel Collins, Victoria Kremers, Annie Besant becomes a member immediately. And they get kicked out at a certain point right after the Ripper murders. They're basically Mabel Collins, who has a reputation as a spiritual vampire. She ends up carrying out a lawsuit on Madame Blavatsky right after the Secret Doctrine is published in 1888 again. And that seems to be part of the taking down of the Blavatsky and setting the stage for Besant's new control of the movement. So she leaves, and she takes with her girlfriend, Victoria Kremers, and they both kind of leave, although Victoria Kremers still manages Lucifer magazine for another couple of years. So go figure, right? Are you really leaving it? To what degree is that true? And they create the Pompadour Cosmetics company with this most renowned black magician, Robert Johnston Stevenson, who's been writing for Pall Mall Gazette. He writes on black magic, and he's actually based in the reason why I think he's the one who's doing the most work, like carrying out the murders, is that he is based in a hospital. He checks himself into a very specific hospital. Let's see if I have a picture of it here. I think I do. I don't know where it is, but so he checks into the London Whitechapel Hospital, which is within walking distance of all of the murders, about 2 weeks before they begin, and he checks himself out about 3 weeks after they're over. So he's in for like some nervous condition he says he has, and he just has to like be in this central position, which is a very convenient place to like leave at night. And I would also say that, and people can go in and demonstrate the Freemasonic symbolism within many of the murder victims as well. That's something that anyone can do, and I do it in the course of the first of the series. But yeah, I'm not going to do that right now. But it requires a level of coordination, because these women had to have been brought to that position knowing that they were going to be set up to be murdered at a very specific time. It had to be so you need to have several people at least active in each one of the kills. It involved as well probably many Jack the Rippers, not just him alone, but I think he was definitely one of them. And he was writing and publishing works on African black magic, tantric black magic, the importance of killing harlots, specifically for certain rituals. So he had written extensively on this while it was happening. He was even participating, and he got arrested twice, Johnston Stevenson, while they were still trying to find Jack the Ripper, because the police thought it was him. And he was able to somehow get away, or at least be brought away. I mean, there are so many there are thousands of people being arrested for all sorts of incompetent reasons.
Right.
But he was already like throwing out his hypotheses, being published widely in T. Steed's journals, showcasing his theories of who the Ripper was, why he was killing. He was the first person to put out the black magic theory, which he probably did because he was doing it and knew what it was about. But it was all tied in with like half truths too, right? Like these guys are always, you got to take it all with a grain of salt, because they're saying the truth, but they're tying it into a bunch of garbage.
Yes.
So I don't know what happens to him really. Like after that, it becomes weird, because he sets up this Pompadour Cosmetics company. God knows what formulas he's using for the women and the feminine products that they're selling. It gets absorbed by some British cartel afterwards. It's in the location, the next door neighbor to Sherlock Holmes. And keep in mind, Sir Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle. He was trained by Jesuits. His middle name is Ignatius. He made this location in his fictional books 1 year before the Jack the Ripper murder began. So in 1887 was when the first Sherlock Holmes tale begins, and that's where he chooses to set up this location, which is also right next door. And I would say I haven't found anybody who's done this work, though I'd be curious if anybody listening knows this is where the London tram underground subway is located. I would be curious if there is some sort of a ancient temple there of some sort, perhaps a temple of Isis, maybe, or a Mithraeum. I'd like to know. I think that there's something sacred to that site. And keep in mind as well, England was known as, or the river Thames is known as the river Isis and has been since the days of Roman Londinium.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you had the Claudian invasion in like 46 BC. And that's where the biggest Isis temple was set up as Rome was becoming an empire. And I would say when you look at it, it's also this that location for the Temple of Isis happens to be the location that the square mile was built up around later on. So the square mile of London, people wonder, where does it get its credentials? Why is it this supranational and like geographical area? Well, it is the Temple of Isis capital in Roman Londinium. It's just like Paris too, right? Like Paris is known, it got its name from Par Isis. It's from Isis. That's the grouping of sorcerers who like lived in the location we today call Paris. And it was known as the on the continent, at least, the center of the Isis worship on the continent. There's a lot of homages to this during the London Olympic or the Paris Olympics. So, there you go. London was once home to an ancient Roman temple dedicated to the god Isis. Yeah, that's right. There's a lot more on this that people can do. So I would imagine that Conan Doyle didn't know exactly, maybe he did, how that was going to be used. He probably didn't know about, a cosmetics company run by, black magicians at that but there's probably something, there's a reason why they selected that location. That maybe people haven't done the work on. Yeah. So there's that. And then the other thing is that after this, is taken down, or after this disappears, it's bought up, it's absorbed by some company, and I'd like to know what that company is that buys Pompadour Cosmetics. Mabel Collins gets involved with Mystica. Another theosophical branch in Germany, I believe. And Baroness von Kremers goes on to become the business manager for Aleister Crowley starting in 1907. And the founder and secretary of his Mysticum, I can never pronounce it properly, but it's the M Lodge, which is the British outgrowth of the Ordo Templi Orientis. So basically, you have the Ordo Templi Orientis. Oh, right, and that's Mabel Collins there, and that's that's the Cleopatra's Needle that was installed in the 1870s on the River Isis, aka River Thames, overlooking, and her apartment that she was living at the time overlooked Cleopatra's Needle. And you have these two sphinx flanking it on either side, and she goes through actually in one of her autobiographical accounts how it was during this time that she began hearing voices from the needle, became obsessed with it while she was still, she's still a wife shackled to the kitchen at the time, looking out. And then she would describe how somehow she began experiencing in the middle of the night, men in robes who would begin to do ceremonies in the middle of the night around the needle, and she would watch them. And then they began to walk into her house, chanting over her bed. And it was during this time that she went into trances and transmitted through the ascended masters like Courtenay and a few others, the book The Idyll and the Lotus, which became Aleister Crowley's inspiration when he formulated his Thelema doctrine. So this is also what got her into, this all happened to her before she went and became a disciple of Blavatsky. So it seems like some MK Ultra shit happened to this woman. Yeah. God knows what, right?
Right.
So you got that. And then so Baroness von Kremers is Crowley actually writes about her in his Moonchild in 1917, which I have over there. It's a crazy ass book. And he describes basically Baroness von Kremers as somebody who scares him, who's like the Inquisitor and the witch. He's she's like, he basically describes a hyper schizophrenic Jekyll and Hyde persona, as I think they all are. I think everybody here has a split personality complex that people like Edgar Allan Poe was exploring very, very rigorously in many of his works, like The Imp of the Perverse and The Telltale Heart and The Black Cat. Like Poe is really doing a deep dive on the oligarchical psychological split personality disorder type in many of his stories. And I think he made a lot of enemies because he did that so effectively and concisely. But they all seem to suffer from various elements where they can become like a beast at night, blood drinking beast, and then a seemingly functional person in the daytime. You know, we've all seen examples of like these things in our current lifetime too.
Jekyll Hyde,
yeah. And oh yeah, there you go. That's Arthur Conan Doyle and an embarrassing array of spirit photographs of fairies.
Yes.
That he wrote a whole book promoting these things, and it was embarrassing because it was demonstrated that these were all faked images by these teenage girls who took they basically did like double film. They made fake photographs using fairies that were illustrations in a book of short stories for kids that featured his own stories. So he just wanted to believe so much in these fairy creatures and gnomes and elves that I don't think he's in control of himself. Like I think that he's kind of like people like this are necessary for the oligarchy, but they are not the ones who decide ultimately. They're living in a delusional fantasy realm, creating a culture that the oligarchy knows that it needs for its own the replication of its own existence. Oh yeah, that's him in a spirit photograph being exposed by Harry Houdini exposed all of this stuff. It was great. Yeah. Now, the last thing I'll say about Donstan Stevenson is that he becomes a Christian. 1893, he converts and becomes a devoted Christian after meeting and being organized by a woman named Victoria Woodhull. You know, you probably heard of Victoria Woodhull.
That sounds familiar, but I don't know. Yeah.
She's like a feminist icon. She's the first woman who ran for president.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And she was and she was a former spirit medium. So she was a channeler. She made a lot of money with her family, touring America, channeling the dead as a necromancer, kind of like the Fox sisters. And and she got sponsored by Cornelius Vanderbilt. Right. She actually published the first American publication of Marx's Communist Manifesto in America. That was her who published that. And she was like somehow this mystical Christian priestess or something. And she's the one who meets up with and then converts Donstan Stevenson to becoming a Christian. He writes one last thing on the patristic Gospels before he then just disappears. He seems to live for like another 20 years. But he just disappears off the face of the earth. So God knows what the hell happened to him. Maybe he went to one of these Eleusinian underground cities or some shit that they might have out there where they reward their heroes, you know, who are mercenaries who do enough evil to the point that they can be given, you know, hedonism till they die. I don't know. It's a theory. But another thing that's weird that I'll just say is the last point on the Jack the Ripper murders to just close this thing out. Is that, or close out the idea. I don't want to shut down the conversation, but H.H. Holmes, we're talking about, you know, Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle.
Right.
As all of this is happening, there's this guy named H.H. Holmes. That's not his real name, but his real name is Herman Webster Mudgett. He's a medical student specializing in surgery in the United States, in Chicago. And he becomes prolific as America's first serial killer starting in 1889. Although it seems like he started killing maybe as early as 1887. He disappears for a small period of 1888 during the time that the Ripper murders are happening. He kind of like just disappears from the earth. Don't know what happens to him. Some people say his great-grandson is alive, thinks that he went to London and participated. His great-grandson thinks he was Jack the Ripper. I'm thinking maybe he might have been, or maybe he did participate, but he's America's first serial killer, who takes on this fake name and has, like, during the Chicago World's Fair of 1893 is when he carries out the majority of his murders in his murder castle. So he buys this, what's known as the Holmes's castle in Chicago. It's designed in a Gothic castle style. It's not really a castle, but it's pretty big. Got little turrets and stuff. It was destroyed in the 1920s, I think. But he builds this whole thing from scratch. And it becomes like a hotel with all these trap doors, incinerators, all sorts of things, and people just go missing left and right. And it seems like there's police cooperation to keep him safe during Chicago World's Fair, where people are coming from all over the world. There's also at the end of the Chicago World's Fair is where you have the World Parliament of Religions,
Yep.
right? Part of the same thing, overseen by a bunch of Swedenborgian, Freemasons and stuff. And this is where they're
very active today. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And this is where Vivekananda is brought in. A lot of the Theosophists are highly represented. So it's really an anti-Judeo-Christian movement to restore, basically to normalize a world beyond Christianity, and even taking like a dishonest expression of or representation of Buddhism. Like they're specifically the variations of Hinduism or Buddhism that are favorable to the British Empire. So they're already grooming, like esoteric Buddhist representatives or particular types of Gnostic Muslims that are what the sorcerers of the empire want, and those representatives are brought in to represent Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism, and so that becomes the thing that this guy Holmes is carrying out hundreds of murders, and he's somehow caught in like 1896. We don't know exactly how many murders he carries out. Now, what's weird is William Randolph. That's kind of like a cut out of I guess his murder mansion. Of what it kind of looked like, and kids are like there's crazy bad stories here. Now, while he's waiting to be put on the gallows, here's a weird thing. In around 1896, he accepts money from Randolph Hearst, who is very closely related to W.T. Stead. W.T. Stead is still publishing material on black magic during his time in his Borderlands, and other things.
Is that William Stead? William Thomas Stead?
Yeah.
The Americanizing the world.
William Thomas Stead. That's got to be
This was
1912. Yes.
This was 1901.
Yes,
okay.
That's right. Yeah. And he plays a role in creating the Pilgrim Society to create and he's promoting Cecil Rhodes's vision for a new world federation of the British Empire.
Yep.
I'm not even convinced that he actually died on the Titanic. I'm thinking there's something weird happening that I'm seeing as a pattern where a lot of these high level people like Hearst and Stead, they tend to, or even this guy Holmes, they disappear off the face of the earth. The thing is, his grandson is convinced or great grandson is convinced he doesn't die.
Wow.
And the more I look at the information his great grandson is presenting, it seems true. Like he accepts like something like $10,000 when he's about to die in 4 days or something from Hearst. Hearst is a prodigy of Stead,
right?
Teaching, government by journalism. He accepts money when he's about to die, like a huge amount of money at the time, to write his memoirs, which he does here. How he killed, who he killed, why he did it, and he's like, the devil possessed me, and I'm an artist of murder, and you can't tell a poet to not do poetry. You can't tell me not to do murder. Anyway, that's the sort of logic he's putting out. It's weird.
Wow.
And his basically he's hung in a very closed ceremony. He's hung, and they follow through with his demand that his body be buried in a really weird way, which is under like 10 feet of concrete. He wants to be in a cement block, like 10 feet high, 10 feet deep of concrete, in which his casket will be placed. And they satisfy this really weird demand from this guy who's taking money to write down a bunch of sort of limited hangouts for the public mind. They exhume his body. Like this year, they exhumed his body. His great grandson was like leading the fight. They did it. And it is weird. Like there was like a casket when they dug it up, and it's right next to this place called Mount Moriah Cemetery, which is where he's buried. Now, Mount Moriah is also the name for Solomon's Temple. But it's in I think it's in Chicago. And they exhumed his funeral site and found that there was a fake casket with nobody in it, first of all, which was weird, above the cement. And then they kept digging down. They broke through the cement, got his other casket out, and there was a skeleton in it. There was a skeleton, except the skeleton's like 4 inches shorter than this guy, Holmes actually was. He was 4 inches taller, implying that seems to be a decoy body. So what the hell did they do with him, right? Like what happened there? And there's something weird that took over Chicago after the big. Yeah, it's really strange. Really, there's all of these weird anomalies everywhere in these sorts of stories. So in my mind, again, what I'm always thinking about is some sort of paradise island or something that they reward the heroes with, some form of like Elysian fields or something, as the sacred site of evildoers. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. This is a hypothesis I'm into entertaining. And they say he lived out his days, as a super rich cocoa plantation owner or something. And there's all these like stories, but it's just weird. And it does seem to be that the Jack the Ripper murders does seem to be a black magic occult ceremony that's tied to the Isis Urania temple, the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, esoteric section of Theosophists that were sort of initiating something, and they felt that they need to carry out this sort of. Oh yeah, by the way, most Masonic scholars, including this Freemason Kevin L. Guest, wrote a book on the secrets of Solomon's Temple.
Okay.
And they seem to agree they've come to a consensus that the Solomon Temple is built according to the ratios of the Vesica Pisces as well. So when you look at the crap going down today in the Middle East, and this whole obsession with killing the red heifers, rebuilding Solomon's Temple, which is a serious consideration in the minds of a lot of these Kabbalistic occultists who have been indoctrinated to think that that's their assigned duty in the universe. That's associated with some weird end times ritual. You can't understand any of that stuff that's happening today if you don't look at these people who were setting the stage for political Zionism, Christian Zionism. They're all doing that. They're all doing this Templar revival thing. They want to restore the Templar managed kingdom of Jerusalem. That's what they want to do today. They still want that, but that means that the land has to be purged of all of the Arabs and Jews living there. And what better way than to get them to do it themselves by introducing certain ideologies, whether through the Muslim Brotherhood, or through the Zionist Kabbalist groups that will then just do what they do. You just put people like that in the same area and they will fight each other. Milner Faith Conspiracy. Oh yeah, I got that book.
Yeah, too. He goes through the whole plan. Yeah.
That's it. And it's like all these guys who are setting up the Zionist state, carved out of British Mandate Palestine. They're all, Lord Alfred Milner is co-writing the Balfour Accords with Lord Balfour and Lloyd George, and they're anti-Semitic. They hate the Jews. They actually hate Jews.
Oh yeah.
And they want Nazi fascism. They want that.
Yeah.
And they just found a way to solve the Jewish problem by convincing all the Jews through terror. Because I mean, like I said, just like when the Templars were or when the Crusaders were sent down to do the first crusade, they wiped out whole Jewish towns along the way because Christ killers got to kill the Christ killers. And the same thing happened in the Jack the Ripper murders. I mean, people like Sir Robert Anderson, who was working with Warren and was a Plymouth Brethren, a follower of Darby and from the same sect that Aleister Crowley came out of. He was writing articles describing how it's a Jewish killer that's carrying out the murders. So there were whole riots, anti-Jewish riots all over England during 1888, 1889. And, these were the same groups around the Theosophists who were creating the protocols of Zion. Like they were the ones promoting this in the Russian courts.
Right.
They're doing that because they're profiling the Tsar Nicholas II. They know that he's got that's Anderson right there, highly decorated. But they know that Tsar Alexander Nicholas II is super paranoid. He's got a mystical problem. He's got Theosophist connected advisors. And they bring in this forged document that they create, and that convinces them that there is this that the way he can understand a very real conspiracy to destroy Russia. Like it's true. There's a Freemasonic conspiracy to destroy Russia. That's true.
Yeah.
But the way to understand it now is to read the Protocols of Zion, which reads like an evil Pinky in the Brain, comic book, and it's like lifted directly from text written from the dialogue of Montesquieu and Machiavelli. Like 60% of its text was lifted verbatim, demonstrating that it's a fake book to to basically get him to reimpose the pogroms, reimpose the Jewish ghettos, crack down on the Jews, and it drove him kind of crazy. He fired some of his most trusted advisors because they had like connections to Jews, like Sergei Witte. He just fired them all and put himself right in a position for a Bolshevik revolution, like just by imposing all of this like pressure onto the peasants, restoring the feudal systems in the ways that he was kind of inclined to do, in a certain way. I mean, but especially attacking the Jews, kicking them out of Russia so that they could only go to other parts of Europe. But every part of Europe, whether they went to France, they had the Dreyfus Affair, which was again a way to like get people into a frenzy against the Jews, because Richard, this soldier Dreyfus was accused of German espionage, and he was Jewish, so it was a Jewish conspiracy, and it drove the French crazy. And so the world became so unbearable in Europe for Jews that was like, well, you can go to this British Mandate area in the desert and have your new nation there. And a lot of people were good people. They just wanted to stop getting slaughtered. And they went there and they didn't realize how they were being played by these same anti-Semites who just always saw the state of Israel as something that would be useful for a period to trigger a massive purge of the area to reconstruct Solomon's temple, but not for the Jews. It was for the pagan witches and wizards that want to So messed up.
It's really messed up. And it's like everything I look at seems to point to that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that it all seems to point in the same direction. And it's really, I think the thing that's so unfortunate about it is they've been so successful in creating, because they've taken these two, very deep religious sentiments of people who are, innocent people in most cases who, just believe what they believe, but they've exploited that, and in order to pit them against each other. And now you have the bystanders who are, buying into these narratives, and they're just so sold. It's I don't really know, I'm not articulating it very well, but it's very hard to watch it, because if you just step outside the sorcerer's circle, it's so obvious that it's been a contrived dialectical pole, that this isn't an organic thing at all. And people say, well, no, this is and I mean, there's elements of the religious conflict, obviously. That's why they used it, in order to foment those tensions. But that they promised that same land to the two same people, and it does seem that it's all about this Solomon, not Solomon temple, for a pagan revival, which is all about human sacrifice. That's scary.
Yeah, they just want to normal. That's such like a high priority for them, is like normalizing human sacrifice. That's their holy grail, is like they want to get to that place where culturally that becomes something the masses are okay with. And they kind of like got through it in a variety of ways by devaluing human beings already through euthanasia programs. Even if you're not fatally diseased, you could still get euthanasia. Abortion, I'm not, sure, maybe there's an argument to be made in certain circumstances, but they want to normalize it to make women think that that's their way. Like we should fight and die for the right to kill babies after they're even born. I mean, so they just normalize this idea of killing humans, whether young or old or whatever. So they're getting us there, but they're not there yet.
No, well, I was going to say that, when that abortion debate, which I really think they were trying to insert, create like a riot type of, like a BLM type effect. It didn't work out that way, but it does look like that's what they were trying to do. But when they were doing that, it was the Church of Satan that was saying you can't take away abortions because it's our religious rights for sacrifice.
No way, huh?
Really? They actually use that argument that, we can't, we have a right to our sacrifice, our rituals under the religious laws. Yeah.
Really, eh? Oh, that's crazy that they made their argument that way.
I think it was the 1991 law that they were citing.
Huh.
But they use that as their rights to be able to have an abortion, because this was the Church of Satan. I mean, it's child sacrifice, and so can't take that away from them. Yeah, I don't know if we can find it, but I remember pulling that up, and I was like, yeah, they're saying it loud and clear, like this is what it's all about. So I'm wondering, maybe you can find it, but while we're looking for that, I'm wondering, so do you think that that's what, regardless of whether or not Jack the Ripper was real or consortium people or this Holmes character, relabeled, do you think that that's what it was all about? It was this kind of like sacrifice, ritualistic.
Yeah, it was definitely
Here it is, Satanic Temple, religious reproductive rights.
And that's how
right on their website.
They just go and do it, eh? Just straight like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's their right to commit sacrifice is tied to their right to have abortion. Well, that's really something that they're taking that line, huh? Yeah.
Religious abortion ritual.
Religious what? Where?
I know.
The Satanic Temple's religious abortion ritual exempts to. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, because there is a
Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I'm pretty sure it was 1991 is the act they were citing, but I could be wrong on that. But anyway, yeah, there you have it. It wasn't.
There's definitely something with a lot of these, like Victoria Woodhull as well, or is an abortion activist. There's a woman as well. When Mary Cecilia Rogers from the beginning of my presentation was making the people make the point that she possibly had an abortion, and this woman who was accused of being the one who carried out that abortion, I forget her name now, but she lived in like a huge mansion, had some weird occult connections as well. And there does seem to be something with witches, like witch covens and baby sacrifices. Yes. And we get it even in popular culture too, right? Like in what's that movie with Bette Midler and the Sex and the City girl of Hocus Pocus? It's like a Disney movie or something, right? And Hocus Pocus, they throw this stuff out there in a diluted way, but it's all about killing children, and it's a Disney movie for like families. But there is something about that, and I think the abortion thing, like I know when I was reading more Crowley, I hate that I have to read Crowley, but I have to read Crowley. He goes through prescriptions on using, of course, he's talking about animals in his written published public works,
Right.
Which book is it? Oh yeah, The Writings of Crowley. Yeah, that one's a crazy book. But he's like going through like advice on guidance on how to conduct certain types of rituals to get certain effects, and in one of them he's describing the need for certain parchments to be taken from a creature that is virgin when it was killed, and you have two types of parchment: the type that was virgin after it was born, or the type that was virgin because it hadn't been born yet. And you can turn their skin into a parchment upon which you have to write certain things or certain ointments and blah, blah, blah. And I'm quite sure that, this is the esoteric outward expression of something that I think has a human version of it for the inner initiates that you could get arrested for if you publish publicly.
Right.
So there's all sorts of things like that. And you're wondering, like, where do the kids go, right? Like, we know that there's all of these children that go missing across the United States, across especially Africa and Haiti, and it's like, where are the kids going? And in some cases, I'm sure that this accounts for a big chunk of these things. And even like I was surprised to find even like Kali worship. Even today, it's a crisis in India, and the Indian government has been trying to like clamp down on child sacrifice. There's like 80,000 children every year in India who get sacrificed to Kali. This goddess of, that's always carrying around the severed head and has a bunch of like severed heads around her waist of men, and she's standing on Shiva, who's like always represented as being like in a comatose state because he's got like a snake that's bit him or something, like, so it's like some hallucinogenic venom. And so she's this destroyer sex goddess with multiple arms, and her followers for like 700 years were known as Thugis. Like, that's where the thug life comes from. It was popularizing the assassin cult of thugs. That were set up as this grouping that I think is tied to the same Ismaili sect that worked with the Templars, and that got purged in the mid 13th century, and they went to India. They were the only Muslim grouping that had a high presence in India at that time. And the original founders of the thugs were Muslim, and then they branched off to a variety of other groupings. And I don't think, when I say Muslim, I mean it's this Gnostic, pagan Muslim fake thing.
Right.
that created this Kali worshipping thug network of hereditary membership. It's through male fathers to sons that you became a member, and the idea was torture and murder was your way of worshiping Kali by balancing the universe, which needs evil to be balanced. And so there were sacred murders.
It seems to be the common theme, right?
Yeah, and then the British would say, "Oh, we clamped down in the 1830s on the Kali cult." But it's like, did you really? I mean, it was around that same time that the Aga Khan, the first Aga Khan, was created too, right? Which was like the preferred version of Islam in the Muslim world that would be working for the British Empire. And there's been now several Aga Khans that managed India. That was their assignment, was to manage the Brahmins, to manage India. And today they're run by the Aga Khan and don't really have a geographical land, but they represent like billions of dollars of assets. They're friends with Justin Trudeau and Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and they're members of the Club of Rome and the 1001 Nature Trust with all of these black nobility members of Europe. Like, why is the Aga Khan tied to these things? This is the representative of the Ismailite assassins, the Hashashins, right? The guys who would get high on hash and carry out assassinations, working with the Templars, killing often their own fellow Muslims who were trying to bring peace to the Holy Land to stop the Crusades. And they would just keep the Crusades, the forever wars going, because that's how they see the purity of being human, is through forever wars to balance whatever goodness might be out there. So you look at it today and it's like, what's stirring up the problem? I mean, peace is a natural thing that humans do. We solve problems. And it's like, look at Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat. Not that long ago, they were on the road to making peace between the Arabs and the Jews. And that all got sabotaged because, an operation was deployed to kill Yitzhak Rabin, and then they killed Arafat. And the ones doing both killings, was like a Zionist frenzied freak who's tied to the rabbi, the Kabbalistic Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, who was deployed to be the terrorist killer of Yitzhak Rabin that sabotaged the two-state solution in the 90s. And then Arafat seems to have gotten killed by polonium, which seems to have been something that was done by somebody around him. And then you got Hamas, which grew out of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood was a grouping that was created by British intelligence and British Freemasonry in the 1920s, following a lot of the logic and the mysticism of Jamal Abdin al-Afghani, who was a member of the order of Memphis Misraim, or no, sorry, the order of
is that the one who was like
Memphis Misraim?
Yeah, is that the one who was friends with Madame Blavatsky?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you knew that. Yeah, that's right. Totally. Yeah, it comes up in this book here, Initiates of the Theosophic Masters. Jamal, he's the founder of Salafism.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's the philosophical framework that was used to justify the creation of the Muslim Brotherhood and almost every variation of radical Islam that's gotten its support from the CIA and MI6. It all comes from this guy who's himself a Gnostic sorcerer. He's the guy who creates religious fundamentalist Islam. No. And this is what grew out of, so Hamas was created to subvert the type of rational, moral thinking of people like Yasser Arafat, who had a very competent way of approaching dealing with his neighbors that was going to work. It was actually going to work. And so that's what they're trying to sabotage by bringing up these groupings that want the end times from all different factions. So you got now factions who are followers of al-Afghani, who believe in the Mahdi coming back at the end times, like sort of a variation of the Christian Zionist rapture sects that believe that the Messiah is going to come for the second time. And then the Zionist versions that are of the Jewish variety believe the Messiah is going to come for the first time. If, Bibi Netanyahu does this. But it's like they're all equally being run by the sorcerer. Yeah. And it's all like their own people are going to be sacrificed for this fake story.
Yes.
And it's super sick and scary. And I mean, it's for me, like there's so many Gordian knots built on Gordian knots that are multi-generational that are very difficult to, I mean, there's been a certain amount of effort to, I think, try to untangle some of these Gordian knots, largely through the diplomatic efforts made by the Chinese and the Russians. But it's really difficult to think it through. It's so hard. Oh, Buddha Maitreya. Yeah. They're big into the, yep.
Yeah, that's what World Invocation Day is all about. Yeah, they're Lord Maitreya. But I had cut you off. You were starting to say about Jack the Ripper and if it was part of this like sacrifice ritual.
Oh, it was. Yeah, and I don't fully know all the details of it because I'm not a sorcerer, but I've seen there's enough circumstantial evidence that it leads me to a high degree of certainty that it certainly was. Just like I possibly, the American serial killer murders of the Chicago World's Fair and the World Parliament of Religions. These America's first serial killer happened at that same time at the same place that it was happening. Probably not a coincidence, and possibly also some form of ritual reasoning behind that associated with this New World religion. That also, Woodstock, also the first guy who spoke at Woodstock was a guru follower of Vivekananda and a few of these other Kriya Yoga followers who he gave his speech in honor of Vivekananda's opening remarks at the World Parliament of Religions when he opened up Woodstock in 68, I guess. And, you got things like that. You got the Eranos conferences as well happening in 33 at the same time that the 1933 Chicago World's Fair is also happening at the same time. So you have Carl Jung and these theosophists managing this Eranos conference to unite East-West occultism, basically.
Yeah.
As they're doing this thing in Chicago, and there's these moments that are important ritualistically for the social engineers. There's definitely things that are outside of their control, that they're disruptive factors that piss them off. So I encourage people to think about all of those disruptive elements that anger the oligarchy, which overthrows their agenda. Because I think that if they got their way, they would have already have had a lot of the things that they're trying to do now. They've tried to get those initiating moments already in the past on many instances.
Well,
that,
Oh, no. Finish and then I'll tell you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, like, I think they wanted, the Nazis to win originally. Sure. That they didn't want the Nazi operation to be something that was aborted, that was supposed to be an effort for a eugenics-run transhumanist world government under a sorcerer priesthood of the SS Thule Society and a small coterie of mystery cults tied to Theosophy. That we came close to getting that, but
there's argument to be made that some of it did go underground, but yeah.
Oh, it certainly did. That's the thing, because the Nazis didn't get defeated. They got co-opted and absorbed into Anglo-American intelligence and Operation Gladio. So it was like a battle won, but the war was not won in any way. It was just a battle that was won. But like, again, a lot of very smart people who are a lot smarter than a lot of the typical statecraft we see today is of a very mediocre low order, whereas back then you had people thinking on a much higher level who were wielding political power and carrying out coordinated maneuvers against the wishes of this death cult that has bought us a lot of time that otherwise, it's a blessing that we take for granted that we can even have these conversations. But yeah, people just don't know enough of their history to really appreciate what are those weak chinks in the oligarchy's armor that have like proven to have that the oligarchy is afraid of, like that there are things that the oligarchy knows if it permits, it's going to lose its influence and even subvert its long-term interests in existence. And individuals can represent those sets of ideas of natural law that scare the oligarchy to the point that they have to kill individuals. And I don't think that they like killing individuals. I think they like killing millions of people, but I don't think they like killing individuals.
It shows their hand too much. I think
it shows their hand. It shows that like an individual who can actually invoke in a reasonable non-sorcerer way, but we can actually invoke certain principles that will undermine the power structure of this evil ancient thing that's been latched on like a parasite, and it doesn't like admitting or letting people know that that's even possible.
Yeah. No. I think so. Well, to your point, the UN, which seems to be kind of an epicenter of a lot of this, certainly of this one world religion, a lot of this occult pagan revival mysticism, but they say that they're behind schedule. And that's why they talk about like our common future, and they're talking about, you know, their Agenda 2075, and they're saying how, I might have the book here, but somewhere in my mess, but they say that's why it's so imperative that this be, especially the Summit of the Future, where they're voting on their global digital compact. They say all of these things are so important because they're behind their Agenda 2130. And what they say in particular is that it's the United States that has really been kind of a thorn in their side, and that they would be much further along if it weren't for the United States. That there are other countries too, but they particularly point out the United States. And then there was recently this kind of like it was I don't know if it was a whistleblower or it was somebody caught on tape, but somebody at the UN, somebody pretty high up, saying that they didn't think the UN would survive another Trump term. And I don't know enough of the details of, I know Crowder is the one that got the story, but I don't know enough of how the story was captured. So I can't speak to that. But that was the claim, that it was, you know, a like leaked tape that they said that. And I you know, I'm not a Trumpophile. I don't think he's the Messiah.
No, same.
I have my issues with him. But it does seem interesting. I mean, he did say that he would defund the UN.
No, I mean, I think there's a middle ground here where people they just tend to go like you know, Trump derangement syndrome, or he's like, or you can go by him. Yeah, you can go total QAnon, like he's the Messiah type thing, or some other even more extreme version of that. And it's like, well, how about he's a highly flawed human who's like finding himself in a situation that he doesn't fully understand, but he seems to be making like, you can look at the policies that he did. You could also look at the things he's been saying since the 80s, but look at the policies he did when he actually did attain some level of political influence. And there's like a common characteristic of him being highly disruptive and pissing off death cult power freak technocrats that have a very specific pattern of what they want the world to be. And he did things which provably the mind can look at, see the effects of, were disruptive to that agenda. Whether it's like defunding, he got the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords.
That was huge.
And he was making moves to get out of the World Health Organization. I know he was. He didn't just say it. He was making maneuvers to do that. He broke the CIA. He cut the CIA off of conventional U.S. Military forces. He forced the U.S. military in Syria for the first time to start coordinating with Russia that was already in Syria defending Bashar al-Assad. He forced that collaboration. He flushed NAFTA. Like, so the idea of corporations being able to sue the US or Canada or Mexico for doing protectionism, that was NAFTA. It gave corporations more legal power than sovereign nation states. He ended that and brought in the right for the nation to use protectionism to play a role in the economy that was not permitted for 25 years before that. Like, there's a lot of things. He forced collaboration on space development when China landed on the far side of the moon, even though the neocons and Obama passed the Wolf Act in 2011, blocking any U.S.-China cooperation on science and space. That's right. They made it illegal. He actually bypassed that and started coordinating to help the Chinese land on the far side of the moon, where there's all this helium-3 for fusion, which is great. If we actually want to prove that there's no limits to growth ever, then like one truckload of helium-3 will like feasibly power humanity's needs at a very high standard of living for a year with 8 billion people, and God knows how many more. That's one truckload of helium-3 brought back from the moon. So I mean, that just needs to have fusion power, at which point don't tell me, people say, oh, that's always 30 years away. It's like, yeah, it's always 30 years away because the oligarchy is always killing our scientists and sabotaging it.
Yeah.
I think it's actually really quick. I think we probably even already have it. It's just it's part of the secret science program that's been absorbed, into the military. Right. But all this stuff is like limits to growth. None of that. No, I mean, we can have all of these good things. And I know Trump has tons of problems.
Sure.
I don't even think he killed Soleimani, frankly, though. Like, and people say, oh yeah, he killed Soleimani. Well, he says he did, but honestly, I don't even think he did that, because you look at it immediately after Soleimani got killed, and the U.S. military has this very, very independent agency that's not less independent than it was when it killed JFK. It's like more independent now.
Right. He
was the one organizing the peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia to try to rebuild bridges. It was Trump who got Soleimani and his Iranian counterparts to meet in Iraq on June 3rd when Soleimani was killed. That was Trump who was trying to rebuild that as part of the Abraham Accord agenda to like get some form of peace in the Middle East. And that's, again, one of the Gordian knots, is just to recognize, getting some of the Arab nations to recognize Israel. That's a big deal.
Huge.
And the two-state solution, like getting the world, like getting everyone to just allow Palestine to become a nation state. Just that's an important aspect, and getting Hamas to actually, if it's possible, which the Chinese got pretty close to it, I don't know if it's still possible, to start like working with Fatah, that represents the West Bank. They're enemies. And I understand why, but if you're going to get some form of a viable Palestinian state, you got to get that collaboration going. Hamas was deployed independently, probably with collusion of something within the Zionist intelligence agencies, to carry out October 7th.
Right.
To initiate this whole chain of reactions. So there's all of these efforts that Trump had made, that I could see that he had made in collusion with other statesmen at different parts of the world who don't want to blow everything up and create Armageddon.
Right.
That's real. So can he do it again at this point? I don't know.
Right.
Definitely better than Biden. I don't know about Vance. That's
Vance is not good news. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of him at all. He seems
like a Palantir. Whitney Webb seems to have done pretty good work on that, eh?
I think so. And he's also part of that like integralist movement. And he's so I think he's part of that whole kind of like post-liberal kind of it is a theosophical, but from a different angle. It's kind of like a post-liberal right kind of movement. And then this is an extrapolation. I don't have direct evidence of this, but we do know the ties between Peter Thiel and Elon gave Trump conveniently the timing of, originally it was 45 million. And then he's like, no, I backtracked, but it's 40 million a month so that Vance could be the pick. So, the concern with that for me is that they could put Trump in and then
get President Vance.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they did when they got Teddy Roosevelt in as president, right? They killed, what was his name, Hobart, Vice President Hobart, who was the vice president under McKinley. So they eliminated him. They got Teddy Roosevelt, a jackass puppet, to become then vice president. And then once McKinley, who was well loved by the people for good reason, was then assassinated, then they got President Teddy in, who was then able to bring in all this like Anglo-American special relationship, Pilgrim Society crap. So yeah, that's my concern too, is that scenario. For sure.
Yeah. And my other concern is there's just this huge movement of, and it's coming from the, I don't know what you want to call it, the alt-right, whatever that is. But it's, and I do think it's a funded, coordinated effort. I don't think they all know that, I'm not like accusing people of being like witting agents or anything. But it just, from where I'm sitting, because I see such a synchronized mass line effort, it seems like there's this effort to black pill people to make America, and this does seem typical oligarchy kind of strategy, is to black pill everyone into thinking, okay, well, America is this big bully, it's the enemy, and it's all America's fault. And so now we're black pilled on America. But of course, it's also, we have no power, and that the whole, two-party illusion is just that, it's an illusion. So the answer, of course, is, don't vote at all. And that, both of them are somehow witting agents of the New World Order. And I don't really, again, like I don't think Trump is perfect. And I do have my concerns with him, honestly. But I don't get evidence from him that, and I could be wrong, I'm not on the inside here, but I don't have evidence from him. You laid out even more than I would have laid out of, that's contrary to this notion that he's somehow a witting, conduit to execute this New World Order technocratic agenda. So, I mean, whereas like Kamala and Walz are, I mean, they're like very obvious communists, they're obvious tools. So it seems like, I know that's the typical Hegelian fashion, we have bad and worse, and obviously you're going to pick bad because it's not quite as bad as worse. So but I still think that I'm seeing that movement. So if people just opt out and they're like, oh well, don't vote at all, and because you think that you've been given bad selections, then the solution is just to let the crime progress. It doesn't seem like the best answer to me. So
or like if everybody just disengages with the system, then we'll make little micro parallel economies. I've been getting a lot of people who say that, and in my mind I'm like, well, isn't that falling into a divide to conquer trap? Like, are you going to be more capable of fighting back against this highly centralized global oligarchy that controls all of the satellites and most destructive weapons in the world? Are you going to be more capable or less capable of doing something about that? And there's this like utopianism where they're like, well, all I need is my computer, my internet, and I'm okay. But it's like, who controls the satellites that your internet runs on? Like, who controls the electricity grids? The production systems? Like, I mean, there very few people are fully self-contained, very, very few. And most people live in areas where there's winter or a big chunk of the year. Like we just take for granted how much we rely upon a broader process or a system that was built up not by the oligarchy. It was built up largely when you look at how the these big bursts of progress happened. It was always with a fight by people who were often willing to die and did die to defend the idea that humanity and nations should exist and should overcome limits to growth. Oligarchy doesn't give us. They would prefer that we have always been in feudalism. They don't like the idea that we
want to return to.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, well, how do they have all that power if they want to return to something that they don't have anymore? It must be because something happened that removed from them the power that they believe to have been their rightful heritage, which was seen very nicely when most people were illiterate and living low quality lives, digging in the dirt, and were the possessions of the castle owner who owned the land, who owned the trees, and the people were like cows or trees, and we're just fighting each other. And that was the best we could have in life, was maybe become a mercenary or just do what our grandparents did, for the feudal local oligarch, and not know how to read. So the oligarchy wants to bring back a version of that. So I'd always say to people, look at how did we break away from that system? Who were the players that played the key roles, leading us in a good way, representing natural law out of that dark age type of world into something where the potential was increased remarkably? We could look at the policies, we could see the individuals, we could see who died, we could see who fought. Like, let's look at that drama and be inspired by it. And then maybe we'll be able to revisit our current problems with fresh insights into what pathways will be worth our time and energy investment, and which paths are actually going to absorb and waste our time and others, by putting people in a little, there's things that we can do. And the other thing too, I would say, the oligarchy is, they're really philosophically, they're in opposition to natural law. Like they're not natural. Like what they do, the consequence of abiding by stupidity and corruption is naturally to see collapses happen. It doesn't mean that the universe is evil, or that God is evil because evil is permitted to happen or collapses and happen and pain happens. It's not, that's not a sign that's God. That's a sign that we allowed and tolerated too much stupidity, mediocrity, and evil for too long. And the consequence is you forget things that you once knew. You can't sustain yourself. You collapse. And then it's like a slap in the ass to either learn or do it again. So we're at one of these points where it's like, it's a systemic breakdown. Some of it's caused by the oligarchy and they should be held accountable, but a lot of it is also caused by something internally. We could be doing some soul searching as well of like, you know, we're like, people are very quick to blame the Jews or blame the Russians or blame the Chinese or blame the them, whoever the them is. Right. And
them. Yeah.
and then, but there's not there's always more boogeymen to avoid us from having to do real spiritual self-introspection and think, okay, where did we allow the Trojan horses into our morality? Where did we let go of our own responsibilities? And it's so much healthier when we look at ourselves first and we're like, okay, like the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings, right? That's the old Shakespeare quote.
Yes, I love that. And then my question about the oligarchs. So you brought up a lot of, the Templars, and there's all these like knights groups still today. Of course, they have these very exoteric veneers of doing lots of good. There's this whole story, like the Knights of Malta are working on medical charity, and I don't remember what the Knights of Garters, like overt kind of
the Order of the Garter.
But my question is, do you think that they're still as powerful, and that the British intelligence apparatus oligarchical structure, which does look like it is, I mean, it's obviously, part of the, I think it's very intricate, right? It's a big, vast web, but it does look like the British Empire kind of went underground, and they're using, at least the way I see it, is it looks kind of like, the United States has become kind of the front facing power to be the bully, to take the fall in many ways. Which it is corroborated by a lot of what they laid out. That's what Steed talks about. That's what, the Milner Fabians, the round tables, all of them did discuss doing. But a lot of it runs through this, a lot of the psychological operations we see is really where the power structure may be. So we may have the brawn, the military, although that's debatable these days, but that's the theory, right? That's the narrative we're sold. So, but it does look like a lot of the real power structure is coming from these underground operations. And, that's not to say that it's just the British Empire. I think it's, this bigger kind of oligarchical structure. This is a long-winded way of asking you if you think that some of these, like the Templars and some of these other groups, are still very instrumental today in, and where they sit. Like, are they executing, or are they kind of running?
Well, I think that absolutely. The Templars definitely took several different incarnations, right? Like, just like, it's like, what happened to the Golden Dawn? People say, oh, the Golden Dawn disappeared. It collapsed unto itself in like 1902 when Crowley wanted to take control, blah blah blah, and it couldn't peter on. It's like, no, it just it turned into a bunch of other things that are kind of different, but mostly the same. And the Templars as well. I mentioned the manifestation of the Franciscans that have an outward and inner core teaching program as far as an order is concerned, that counterpose the Dominicans, feminine, masculine formulas.
Yes.
For that appeal to different, and that's a fallacy, like right there. I reject that idea of like I believe that there's female and masculine as principles, but at the same time to say that, like, because what they then say is, when you ask them, well, which attributes are feminine, which attributes are masculine, and this is where it gets, I think, bullshit. They're like, oh, the feeling state, the intuition state, that's the feminine, the sexuality, that's feminine, and then like the thinking and the imposing of will, that's masculine. And it's like, that's I wouldn't do that. I don't think that's like, so it's like saying, like, what, men don't have feelings. Yeah, women don't have thinking. Like, what? But so they got this whole sophistical thing. Now there's several other points of rebranding that I noticed in my researches, and one very important point that generated, because the Knights of Hospitaller aren't really called that anymore, right? They're called the Knights of Malta. So when did they get that name? Well, that was 1530 when they moved to Malta as their new headquarters, and they got their new name. But they were still representing the same sort of masculine, penetrating aspect that the Dominicans also embodied in their modus operandi, in opposition to the Franciscan, more feminine aspect of like Gaia worshiping nature. As you know, both sides were still, you know, helping the Crusades and giving sermons in the Crusades and other stuff. So 1530 is a big year. 1534 was when the Jesuits were created.
Right.
It was also the same year that the Anglican Church was created by Henry VIII. In my analysis, all three can be associated with Venice. A Venetian Kabbalist named Francesco Zorzi, who was sort of the godfather of the modern Rosicrucians, who taught Robert Flood, and Elias Ashmole later on was a follower of Zorzi. He represented a very high-level Venetian family, very, very active in as a Roman patrician family earlier on, before Venice became the seat of empire. So he became an advisor to the papacy in the 1520s. He also played a role in Henry VIII's court as well, with another guy named Thomas Cromwell, the grandfather of Oliver Cromwell, who was an assistant to a leading Venetian banker who led the program for creating his own church with the King of England as the head of said church. And that became sort of the new religion for the British Empire, with the hereditary king as the new Pope, God-man, like the prima inter pares. And I'm quite persuaded that the line of reasoning that was advanced to justify that, even though they wouldn't say it publicly, though we get glimpses of it indirectly through when you research things from this light, is that they follow the Gnostic belief that Jesus didn't die, but had babies with Mary Magdalene that lived out their days in southern France. Or a variation involves Jesus dying, but that he still impregnated Mary Magdalene, who had the babies in southern
Da Vinci
France.
Code, right? Isn't this
Da Vinci Code stuff? Yeah. That's the
okay. I'm like, this sounds familiar. Yeah.
And the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, that was the basis of Dan Brown's recounting of the thing in the Da Vinci Code. Right. That was a 1982 book written by Michel Bagnon, who is a high-level Quatuor Coronati Lodge member of that same lodge that Walter Besant and Sir Charles Warren and Henry Edward VII managed to reconstruct Solomon's Temple. So that, you know, he had a motive. There was a reason for him to write that story, you know, that put the Merovingian family, and especially like the St. Clair family, played a big role. There's actually a book I was just reading on the history of Clan St. Clair by this guy Vance St. Clair, who's like part of the family. So again, you got to read this stuff with a grain of salt, but that's at least one of the stories they tell themselves. Right. I don't believe it, but they tell themselves these stories, that all of the different royal families have different degrees of blood from Jesus, and, you know, they got their own idea of Jesus as being a certain demonic entity or some spirit entity or something that's not really what most Christians or even Muslims think of Jesus. It's something, they got a different idea of what that means.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's part of, I think, what Henry VIII probably believed when he was overseeing a new church that would have him and his children, his bloodline, as the popes of the church. Right. So all that to say, the Knights of Malta, the Jesuits, I think the Jesuits sort of took on a more feminine brand of like penetration, engulfment, the Fabians later studied and adopted. Which is one way of subversion. You know, there's like a young America, young Europe, like that Mazziniite type of like, let's create amplify the emotions, the feelings of the masses that don't really have to think about what they're a part of, and just have that feeling state which is often like sympathetic because you're like, yeah, you've been through a lot of injustice. Like the corporate power was super unjust, it did a lot of damage. I understand. I can feel where young people would feel like would become radicalized in the green ideology or something, because they empathize so much with the pain of the tree that's screaming as the lumber guy is cutting it down, and it's indoctrination, but it's like it's human as a feeling.
Right.
But that's like sort of, I think, how the Jesuits have sort of been deployed and carried out. As Albert Pike says, the Jesuits were a more intelligent brand of Templars. So in Pike's own words, in his Morals and Dogma, he even says it. It's just that the Templars were not as sophisticated as the Jesuits, and so they got too big for their britches and had to be taken down. In Pike's words, probably a lot more to the story, actually. But so they would operate, I think, as the left hand to the Malta right hand path, which was to sort of be the Gnostic revivalists who are working to rebrand Christianity the way the Da Vinci Code actually does it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward for people.
Yeah.
And the Knights of Malta also believed that the Bible was the known canonized Bible is fake. That's what they believe, just like the Templars or the Jesuits believed in the inner levels. On the lower levels, they don't know. I think most people have no idea. But the upper level, they also believe that it's fake, but that it has to be, that the lie has to be defended even if we have to kill everybody who casts any type of doubt, like they did in the Inquisition. So it creates this counterbalance. And then the Jesuits, who took over the papacy very recently, work on the opposing side of this liberal globalist transhumanism, so they're promoting the wokest sort of version of fascism, whereas the Knights of Malta, who have been sort of penetrating the US, that's what Pike was a part of. He was more the masculine, Mithraic, Maltese approach to the witchcraft of the, impose the will of the slave master over the slave, the strong over the weak. And they had an expansionist view too, right, of the Knights of the Golden Circle. That's what Pike was a part of, was like, let's grow the slave principle to take over Central America, to take over Mexico, to take over like Brazil. And they had a whole idea for the Golden Circle with Cuba as its center point. That was going to be the center of the new capital. And, like, I see that the transhumanists on the right, like you brought up, Peter Thiel and Musk, they represent the ideology of the same thing, which is like Musk is pushing, NED coup d'etats in Venezuela, and he's pushing it in Brazil, and he's pushing it everywhere. That's what X is being used for, is overthrow governments that are targeted for being overthrown, so that you could bring in more Pinochet-like Milei right-wing governments that are libertarian to privatize everything, as if that's never been tried before, and slash all like social security nets and everything, because screw bureaucracy, it's all evil. And it's like, well, now you've got a bunch of people who can't eat, criminality is going up, foreign corporate power is taking control of Argentina completely, poverty is increasing, and you think that you just got a big success, and people wonder, well, why is Elon Musk getting
creating
out of
chaos, which is the perfect breeding ground for the usurpation of power, right? When you have the chaos, it's when the authoritarians come in with their quote unquote solutions.
They love it. So yeah, it's like two sides of the same thing. And the Knights of Malta, like I said, like today, Opus Dei was seeded into the United States in the 70s. It was created in the 20s, but it is a real thing. And it's like the power brokers behind the Opus Dei are quite significant. This guy, Leonard Leo, is a really big power player, friend of Antonin. He's now dead, Scalia, but he's positioned himself to be a huge influence in the Republican Party and around. He's influencing a big chunk of the MAGA groupings in a scary bad way. So yeah, they're pushing for another new golden circle fascism, where you hear a lot of really good pro MAGA people are getting pulled into this garbage of thinking that we need to like invade Mexico to stop the immigration problem. We need to militarily go and intervene on Venezuela to impose democracy there because Maduro's a bad guy who lied or something. And so or China, like, we have to go in and obviously like bomb Russia, evil Iran in China, sure. And so a lot of good people are getting pulled even though they became MAGA because they were disgusted with the US acting like an empire. That's why MAGA exists, because the neocons were so disgusting. But they're getting like sucked into it now in another way. So it's a concern for me big time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm seeing is that there's like this the two wings on the bird of the theosophical underpinnings, and that's really kind of how they're capturing the people. The MAGA group are, I mean, the left, we know how they're pulling them, and they've been very successful for a really long time. But I'm seeing it, the MAGA group, definitely like through the medical freedom movement, which makes sense with Malta, former hospitalier, right? And when you look at that movement, I mean, and you just look at even the psychological operations that occurred with that, like anybody who rejected the mask at first and then decided not to get a jab suddenly was labeled right wing, and which was absurd because a lot of them weren't at all. When you actually look at the so-called anti-vaxxers, a lot of them were actually on the left, and a lot of these people who rejected the jabs were very confused. They're like, I'm not on the right wing at all. But suddenly they started, because they've been demoralized, destabilized, isolated. Now all of a sudden they're like, oh, maybe that is my new group. Maybe that is my new identity. And they put this wrapper on them. And now you see that movement is being infiltrated with all of these like Scientologists, these UFO cults, and you're seeing it through the religious movements too. So you have now this that I was talking about before, this post-liberal group, which are a lot of very Christian, various sects of Christianity, but these kind of very traditional Christian, or they say traditional, but that's questionable. But that's the label again. It's the exoteric veneer. That's the identity that they've assumed, is that they're traditionalists. But they're vying for things like really like a theocratic state. And, that's, I mean, we've seen historically that didn't go too well either.
Yeah, well, the whole Christ is King thing, right? That's been coming up a lot lately.
Yes.
And whether it's Russell Brand or Candace Owens are getting pulled into this. Like they've definitely been profiled because they've got a charisma and a naturalism to them, a certain passion, which is very good. But they've been psychologically profiled. There's probably been worked on for years to bring them into a state of experiences where they're just like they've passed the threshold, and now they've got a new identity that's been set up for them to jump into, that's been proven to bear certain results every time this category of idea, this template of identity has been created for people throughout history. The oligarchy knows how to do this stuff. And they can break out of it. They can snap out of it and realize where they made a foolish presumption or made a judgment.
I mean, Candace's latest, I don't know if it's her latest, but it's pretty recent, where she's talking about how Americans don't know that Stalin wasn't Jewish. And I'm like, they don't know that because Stalin wasn't Jewish. He actually grew up a Georgian Orthodox Christian. I mean, and then he became a Marxist, which I would argue is satanic, but it definitely wasn't Jewish. So
it's weird.
No, she's throwing stuff out there that's just like, and people are buying it. They're eating it up.
Yeah, because there's a certain amount of just eloquence, and there's some weird connections with her husband too. And
Lord Farmer. He's the son of Michael Farmer, who's connected to the whole ARC thing, right? Sir Paul Marshall, who's tied to Legatum. Yeah. That whole thing.
I just started scratching. You scratch further. I'd love to know what you know about that, because there's all of these things, and I think part of it too, like look at Bannon, right? Like, ARC, of course, ARC. Okay, yes,
Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. Well, it was originally, so talk about like grooming. So this is theory. I can't prove this, but what's interesting is when you look at the financial history of ARC, Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, it was originally Prosperity UK 2016. When did Jordan Peterson like catapult onto the scene? It was 2016 with Bill C-16 in Canada, right, against the pronouns. And he was, a college professor, And suddenly, like, his tapes are all being watched, and he's rising on the circus, and then they're doing all these like Pepe photo gotcha moments, and he's suddenly been branding as being on the alt-right. Now, I don't know if they were grooming him at the time, but to me, he has a lot of the markers of somebody who was like a MK Ultra project. Yeah. And I do think, his time in 2020 seems like when they pulled those triggers. But I think, and again, this is theory, this is speculative, but it looks like they laid the groundwork for triggers to be placed and implemented. And then in 2020, with his drug rehab, and he talks about being split in two, and it took him a while to be able to talk again. But there's very interesting ties with Legatum. They claim the ARC is the counter to the World Economic Forum. However, Legatum is literally a client of the World Economic Forum. So the funding arm seems to be playing two sides of the
well, there you go. Yeah, and yeah, the fact that you selected his favorite outfit too as the banner is appropriate, right? The fire and the Apollo Dionysian day night schizophrenic Jungian crazy shit. Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Yep.
And that's definitely. See, I think part of it from the standpoint of epistemological warfare, it's like when you look at the framework of idea sets that like Jordan Peterson shaped his identity around, you can know a lot. If somebody says that they're like a devotee of Friedrich Nietzsche, it doesn't mean you have to read everything Nietzsche wrote. You can read a few things and you could see that there's some that comes implicitly with certain assumptions about the nature of will, the nature of reality, the nature of purpose.
Power.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So
God is dead and we have killed him.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't mean you necessarily assume that the person believes everything Nietzsche thought, but there's still certain core axioms that you can trigger, like you can pull on these levers if that person is a devotee of that theorem lattice. Like a whole from simple axioms or assumptions, you can build up consequences, logical consequences that flow from them, like a tree from a root. And even if the person hasn't thought about the consequences of some of their assumptions, it's still it's still there, though they don't know it's there. And if you're this is why Plato is very useful, because Plato is teaching us how to see what is implicitly a consequence of somebody's root axioms and not get sidetracked by detailed opinions, but to try to focus conversation when you're in a dialectic into exploring core axioms that may or may not be right, but have to be tested, because we often don't examine those things. And the same thing for Carl Jung. You can't be Jordan Peterson is celebrated by a lot of Christians because of his lectures on the Bible.
Right.
You can't be a Nietzschean and a Jungian and somehow still call yourself a Bible scholar, or like the Bible. Like, you can't.
Well, you can't call yourself a Christian. I mean, it's kind of
yeah, you can't call yourself a Christian. You could maybe admire the Bible for the behavioral effects it has or something.
Right.
But overall, no. Like, Carl Jung was devoted, as he wrote to Freud in 1912, to overthrowing the Bible and Christianity specifically by restoring the androgynous version of Jesus as the man of the god of the vine, which is essentially Dionysius. And who's androgynous, who's is equally capable of having sex with a man or a woman, who he believes somehow that's his idea. That's Carl Jung's idea of Jesus, and his whole idea of channeling Philemon, the demon, and Basilides, the Gnostic high priest. He was a channeler, and he was integrating the darkness within the light. Like, he's all about this Rosicrucian spiritual alchemy.
Spiritual alchemy, which Jordan Peterson talks about all the time. The time, the dark within us, and merging the dark and the light. He says it all the time. That's his suit.
It's like, rather than do that, how about you become a good person? Like, stop trying to channel the darkness or integrate with your darkness. Like, just try to become a good person who loves the good. Even just try that. It's it's a different paradigm that these guys
orient towards the light. Instead of trying to focus on the dark within. Orient towards I don't mean the love and light type light, but not that type.
Unfortunately timed screenshot there. Yeah.
Yeah. But Bannon's another really interesting one with his naval background, and all of the people around him seem to have some very interesting theosophical ties, as well as the post-liberal movement.
Yeah,
The
he's one
post-liberal
of the few.
movement scares me.
Yeah, it does. It scares me too. And it when you look at, I mean, we've already said a lot, but I mean, when you look at a lot of those who are handling the libertarian alt-right thing today, it's
Yeah.
largely the heirs of the Habsburg dynasty. So the Dominicans
Yeah.
were very active in the Habsburg side of things. The Anglicans and Jesuits were more active in the Anglo-French variants of the empire. When the Habsburgs dissolved as in that form that they had after World War I,
Right.
Otto von Habsburg, Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, the Thurn-und-Taxis family as well, which is highly enmeshed in that grouping, became they didn't disappear and they didn't like lose their power base, though they didn't have the same mechanism to operate within as they did for centuries prior. But people like, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich von Hayek, the Austrian school founders.
Connected to the London School of Economics, who were founded by the Fabians. Yeah.
Yep, and this, they worked hard to infuse the Keynesian Fabian doctrine into the left wing parties, especially in America, the Democratic Party during the Cold War. That was the infusion. Get rid of the JFK, Lincoln, FDR identity type within the Democratic Party, and replace that with Keynesianism, which is, again, eugenics, world government. It's the whole thing. And then on the right wing in the Cold War, the infusion was Keynes's lifelong friend and fellow pro-world government advocate, Friedrich von Hayek.
Yeah, whose whole last chapter, I keep pointing this out to people. I'm just like, read the last chapter of Road to Serfdom.
Yeah, he's very explicit, but people don't want to do that, and whatever. It's a religion. So anyway, his ideology was infused into the Republican Party, overseen by certain groupings that became things like the Heritage Foundation, which ironically spun out of the Mont Pelerin Society run by Friedrich von Hayek, Walter Lippmann, a Fabian. So a bunch of Fabians and Austrian school advocates created the Mont Pelerin Society, which seeded in the 70s into America, creating the Heritage Foundation to co-opt and influence the Reagan administration. And earlier on, throughout the 60s and stuff, these groupings, the American Enterprise Institute, they were all being bankrolled by the same fascist networks of Wall Street and the same Eastern establishment families that were funding fascism in the 20s and 30s and trying to get the bankers coup. And that was the same groupings that promoted infusing, libertarianism into the Republican Party to break it free of all of its William McKinley, Lincoln traditions, and instead now have this new idea. Oh yeah, the Mont Pelerin Society it's a useful thing to look into.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them. I've heard of them, but I haven't done any. Okay.
Liberal imperialism to the nth degree. Friedrich von Hayek was a co-founder of this thing. It's super important. It's so powerful. It's an influencer behind the alt-right today. It's tied to and funded by. It was run by heirs of the von Habsburg family.
When you look at the left and the right Hegelian groups, like the right Hegelians all turn to the Habsburgs.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Steve Bannon is sponsored by. I forget which of the Thurn-und-Taxis. I don't know if it's Gloria or another one who's got a castle that she's devoting to Bannon, so that when he gets out of jail, he's going to set up his university to train the new gladiators to oppose the woke fascists. And that's a giant thing. It's also, there's something called the Dignita Humanitae Institute, which is run out of this old monastery, and I think it's Trieste, that was built in celebration of the Fourth Crusade in 1204. by Pope Innocent III after the Venetians took control of all of Constantinople's maritime trade routes when they, finished the Fourth Crusade. They built this monastery in celebration, which is the headquarters of this new think tank to unify all of the conservative movements of the world. It was formerly headed by Otto von Habsburg, and Steve Bannon was given the right to be the sort of front man for it today.
And what was the name of that one? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Dignita Humanitae Institute.
I know this. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Humanitae something.
Yeah, it's very Maltese, Knights of Malta connected, very Order of Science, Priory of, not Priory of Science, sorry, what's the other one?
Last Stand at Bannon's Gladiator School.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, again, it's distasteful to read the New Yorker and leftists talking about this stuff because they're also fascists. So I don't, there's always this ugly, smelliness in their narratives. Sure. Yeah. But there's still also if you just take the objective facts as they are, it's provable.
They still reveal the truth, at least
as far as their judgment calls about things are wrong morally, but facts are facts wherever they come from. And it's a Cistercian monastery. The Cistercians are what seeded the Templars, by the way. Also, they're a radical branch of Benedictines,
and they're Carthusian. Okay, Carthusian.
So you got that thing setting up the new crusades, and it really does try to rebrand Christianity around this whole tribal, monarchically oriented version of Christianity that's more about power projection and opposing heretical cultures like the Chinese. It's very much based on weaponizing Christianity against the Chinese, against the Muslims, against whatever is not falling within the alignment of that branding. So it's setting up a new crusade, a new forever
that's
war
what it
logic,
seems like.
basically. Yeah. So that's a
what it
thing.
looks like. Yeah. Well, what are your? I've kept you for a very long time. Thank you.
It's all good. This is important stuff.
I'm curious, like what you think. I know you were saying that in terms of moving forward, that hopefully humanity can kind of recognize these potential disruptors. So we've outlined some of the most dangerous or potential just kind of smuggling in of what appeared. I'm not wording this very well, but what I think is I think the left is very obvious. And at this point, a lot of people seem to have quote unquote woken up. I don't even really like using that term because really that all comes from the awakening, which is really about the illuminated. It's, they've co-opted all of these definitions. So, but I think a lot of people have woken up to their shenanigans and to that left-hand path and where that ends. But really, I think that they've been very clever now in some of this, as you just pointed out, some of this esoteric veneer wrapping on the right. And so people don't have a very good sense of what's being smuggled in, esoterically. And I find that very potentially pernicious. And I don't think just in America. I see this globally, actually. Obviously, they target different countries and different cultures differently. But I do think that it is kind of a global phenomenon or operation, rather. So I'm curious, I guess the question is, what do you think people can do to recognize that and to potentially advocate for disruptors and to support disruptors? And can there be disruptors, or is Goliath just too big?
That's that's the important question. That is the question, I at the end of the day, I'm very solution oriented as my wiring is concerned. So I mean, I having researched enough history, I'm very confident that we are fully capable, even at this late stage of imperial rot, to reverse course and revive our better traditions. Because there's something already good that's there. The thing that they do with the Antifa brainwashing and a lot of the left brainwashing is sort of the opposite of what they do to the naive right. So the naive left, they're given this, like, it's all been hypocritical white dead European males who are hypocrites, and so everything should be torn down and maybe some utopia rebuilt or something. But there's no clear idea of what do you do. Like, how does it work? How do you rebuild a viable, functional society? No idea how that works.
Yeah. It's all about destruction, just tear down.
So there's nothing redemptive in America that they think is even possible, because they think the whole thing is all evil. They ignore everything that's been good, everything that's disrupted the New World Order. They just don't even know. And then the other side, on the naive side, it's just everything is good. We have nothing to apologize for. If anything, the mistake was letting women get out of the kitchen and vote. You know, like, you got that other extreme. Maybe, you know, that's the.
Well, I will just say this, though. The anti-feminist movement, I think, is one of the worst and most destructive psyops. This whole, like, trad wife and, like, you know, the latest iteration of the red pill movement. Well, where does it lead? It leads to either, you know, I know this is not going to sound very popular, and this is not to be derogatory to people who are actually gay, but it's to advocate gay movement, leading to the LGBTQ, because that's the solution. If women are the root of all evil and women are the problem, then what's, you know, what are men going to do? The other solution is transhumanism, because the only purpose for women is to have babies. Replicate. And if they're not popping out babies, and if we don't like them, we can't deal with them except for them to be in the kitchen and make babies, then, well, we have ectolife pods, and we don't really need the women at all anyway. And then the other solution really is, and you see this from a lot of the influencers in the sphere, is to promote Islam. And, you know, I'm not saying that there aren't good, decent Muslims, but, you know, Sharia law is not exactly favorable to women. It is perfectly acceptable to rape women, to pillage them, to just use them as slaves. And that's going to be, and they're also, as we saw from, you know, the Milner-Fabian conspiracy, it's a great conduit to usher in the New World Order and the what they called the internationalist, you know, economic world order at the time, but because it is conducive to tyranny. And again, I'm not condemning people who are, you know, good, decent Muslims. That's those are just kind of, sorry.
No, absolutely. Well, that's the thing, right? It's like they're human first, right? Like, if you're thinking, the oligarchy gets us to be tribal using certain techniques, which is usually take some attribute of us and make that the thing. So whether it's our skin complexion or the language, I live in Quebec, where the whole, like, language thing is, you can't even imagine how bad it is here. Like, where they've really worked for generations to get the French Canadians to identify with their language is always under attack. And it's like a sacred thing you die for. And the English also have been inflamed to become, like, willing to fight and die for their language. And it's like, but, well, what if your idea content is shit? Well, like, you have no ideas. You're just using language to describe, like, what shows you like you think about the idea content first, the culture, the morality first, and they don't think about that anymore. Or the, like, whatever set of rituals or whatever that I associate with the way I worship God, it becomes like my identity, and my humanity is secondary to the ritual. And anybody thus who has a different set of rituals, even if, like, that's why Muslims are the biggest, like, the Muslim terrorists like ISIS mostly kill Muslims. Who don't have the same philosophy of how to interpret the Quran. And you know, you got Christians killing Christians, Protestants killing Catholics, and we did that for centuries. And so you get everybody just to identify with the attribute first. And I think the most important thing is, okay, if we're human first, there's certain common traits that all humans have as made in the image of a living, loving, reasonable creator. Which we can all discover and tap into very organically. And you see effects of how this works when you look at babies, even that don't know language or know what a religion is, that are of different colors, who play with each other. They just naturally play, and kids are just asking questions. And these are the human things. So, you know, if we start with the human things that are universally human first, then we can live together with people. Like, look at Syria, right? That's why they had to blow up a lot of these countries like Iraq or Libya or Syria, is because they worked it out pretty well. And there's a lot of Christians and Muslims living in great harmony. And before things got crazy, under Zionism, you know, you had the Jews living in the Middle East were friends with their Muslim neighbors, and they would babysit each other's kids. And there's all sorts of stories like that, and not so much of that anymore. So the oligarchy wants us to be tribal. And I think the thing with human beings is, too, like, when we're in that state of caritas, of just like, agapic, we get pleasure out of the good of others. We get pleasure out of giving, teaching, all those good, that higher sentiment, the higher set of sentiments.
Right.
When that becomes our mode more regularly, not that we're ever perfectly in it, but when we get a taste of that and that's normalized, then we tend to, if we're religious, we will read our Bible or read our Quran and take what is in harmony with those human qualities, and things that are like dissonant, we'll just simply let that be. We're like, I know that God commanded, the chosen people to kill Amalek, the people of the pagans, and just wipe them all out, and we should have hostility towards. But good Jews won't. That doesn't mean so much for them. They just don't. They're like that's not important to me. It's not useful that's there. I don't get focused on the good things. So like, and it could be the same thing too. Like I know people who call themselves communists. They read Marx. They've read Marx's Capital. I've read some of Marx too, right? And I could say that they're moral, reasonable people who don't know anything else, and they took what was useful to solve a problem within the only thing that they knew, like the critique on exploitation by capitalist corporations. It's fine, okay. Take that critique. It's not a bad critique of how the British East India Company uses capitalism as a veneer for stealing and looting from the weak. It's like that's true. Doesn't mean you have to like take everything in that like private property should be abolished and class struggle is like a forever thing. It's like you don't have to think that. That's just all they knew. And so you could see a lot of the CIA targets throughout the Cold War were people who called themselves communist.
Yeah.
But it's like they're not woke ideologue, world government, let's have collectivism everywhere. They weren't like that. They were just like nationalists first, humans first, trying to make the best of whatever they had, and they only had that at the time and used that.
This is how Stalin creates the naive dupes. Yeah, essentially. Because they're working with a limited scope. Yeah.
And sometimes, like we see with the MAGA groupings, they will be disruptive. They will do things that will, like Fidel Castro kicking out United Fruit from Cuba. Like, I'm not for Castro, but he kicked out United Fruit, shut down Mayor Lansky's operation. Who fucking does that? Like, that's not easy. You get killed for trying to challenge United Fruit and, the CIA mafia global Zionist crime syndicates that want to use Cuba as the headquarters for a maritime empire. So it's like, okay, I'm not ideological about it. I could see where you were disruptive, and I could get why they tried to kill Castro like 60 friggin' times. Like I could see why they would be pissed that a guy like that would do what he did. So it's most people are sort of like, very few are really, really self-aware of these universal principles that are shaping history. Very few for good or for bad. And most people are somewhere in between and can be inclined to, be made better or be made worse depending upon the influences around them. Like look at Thomas Jefferson, right? Like Thomas Jefferson, he was induced to do some really good things when he had good influencers around him, like Ben Franklin. But at the same time, when he didn't have those positive influences around him anymore, he became a huge sponsor of the slave power.
Yeah.
And he, unlike, like he never even, like, so the slave power grew in influence so much under this guy's, and it's not, but that doesn't make him a bad guy.
Right.
It means that his what he did was reprehensible, and the theories he was induced to believe were the way human beings were, because he liked John Locke, was highly flawed and wrong, and he didn't know it. He could have been a better guy, and at different times he was a better guy. And so he's like middle ground people. They're everywhere. So back to the question of like, what do we do?
Yeah. Well, I would argue, I was just saying, I think most people are. I think it's kind of this, I think it's this false binary that people want to see everybody as being good or bad. And really, I mean, does evil exist? Yes. And are there some people who, it's questionable because of their actions, but I think most people are trying to do the best they can with what they have, and they're dealing with situational pressures. And the higher up you are, in any kind of a ladder, whether that be corporate or political, the more situational pressures you're going to be up against. And, I always use the scaffolding analogy, like those strings get tighter when you climb up the ladder, so it's, but that's humans, that's human nature. So we're dealing with, and you never know what that person's dealing with, but it's usually not like, as simple as, oh, it's a bad person, I just want to commit evil throughout the world, or it's a good person, I can do no wrong. Like, it's usually not quite like that.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I believe in heroes, but heroes are still humans and they've made mistakes, but they're willing to die. They're willing to die for their conscience. And like Martin Luther King Jr. said, if you don't have a cause that you're willing to die for, you don't have a life worth living for. Right. So I think that that's generally something not many people make that breakthrough where they're willing to walk the walk. Sometimes they'll say it, but then they're tested and they fail, they run or they cave, Yeah. And that's human too. And that's something we can learn from and choose to deal with, because we learn more about ourselves in crisis than we do when we're not in crisis. So there's an opportunity if we're willing to take it as an opportunity to grow. Right. And so, like for as far as today, like I think that Trump's what he demonstrated as policies in his first term are viable. They're quite in harmony with what I know to be at the center of the fight historically to make America good. That allowed America to beat back the forces of the death cult that have always been there. So when you look at Agenda 47, I mean, I've studied the website and I've looked at the policy program, and I understand why the Heritage Foundation, aka British fascists, infused this Project 2025 garbage into it as a Trojan horse, the same way they did to subvert the Reagan administration back in the 70s, like 78, 79, when they designed this in the first place. It's the same template that they're doing today. I see what they're trying to mimic and what they're trying to subvert within an otherwise very viable Agenda 47 program. Right. Nothing about Agenda 47 is wrong.
I agree with you.
A lot of things are wrong about Project 2025, which is a whole other conversation.
Yes.
So
and he has distanced himself from it publicly several times. He said he is not involved with Project 2025. So
correctly so. I'm happy that he did that very, very well. And it's showing who the agents are who were trying to act like they were supportive of him, but really just to infuse this Trojan horse into the Conservative Party or the Republican Party. So again, I think they need more concrete ideas, an understanding of policy, in order to know what specifically are you going to fight for and what strategy are you going to take to not waste your time. Right. And that's a good overview of things that would generally work, especially the aspect of protectionism, restoring protectionism, and with the focus of building, rehabilitating America's destroyed infrastructure base, which you need to have that in battle. So that's the most important thing, which is totally gone in Project 2025, but that it's very, very present in the Agenda 47 is build up the manufacturing, the sovereign capacity to produce, to do it in a way that involves utilizing national power. That's why the oligarchy wants to get rid of nation states, is because nation states, if they're used as an instrument by patriots, can be wielded as a weapon of offense and defense, utilizing things like protective tariffs, national banking, which is not part of the Trump program, but I think it should be. I mean, that's something which people like Lincoln were able to actualize as the greenback system of nationally directed credit for projects that are going to be in the greater good, but also
he did talk about using Bitcoin as a reserve.
I don't know. I'm on the fence because it's still at the moment so open to speculation that I don't know. And also a sort of control grid or an electricity grid, which is questionable. But I don't know. I'm open to it being used in as part of a basket. Like, Glaziev, I've studied the writings of Glaziev quite a bit, who's a Russian economist. He's the head of the Minister of Macroeconomic Integration of the Eurasian Economic Union. It's a big mouthful, but Anyway, he was a Putin advisor for many years. He's a student of Lyndon LaRouche as well. He's one of the most advanced thinkers on physical economy, and I know he's provided a very good template for what could work, and that would involve Bitcoin and as part of a broader basket of physically measurable production items, whether agriculture, mixture. It wouldn't just be one thing, because different countries do different things better or worse. So you'd want an array of things that are some, in some cases, metals, but in other cases you want a lot of finished goods, because a finished good can only exist if you have an industrial base, and the oligarchy doesn't want people to have an industrial base. So finished, steel, alloys, aluminum, other things like that can be used as part of a basket for whatever type of new currency, digital or physical, whatever that might be, because we're going to get a new economic system, because the current system was designed to collapse. That's why globalization was created. So for people who want to save globalization, forget about it. It was designed to blow up. That's what its purpose is. So we will get a new one, and so the general outlook of Glaziev's approach I see is very reasonable and based upon physical metrics that are tied to increasing productive powers of labor in the physical world, and whatever currency is in circulation is going to be tied to those types of principles, which is very much needed if we're going to have an economy like JFK wanted, tied to infinite growth, always being able to leap over the limits to growth. So whatever form it takes, I don't know. I'm so far removed from any position of influence. I know it has to have these attributes to it. So I see that there's a vector and orientation towards that in Eurasia, much more so than there is here in our part of the world. The only thing I see with some vitality is within the MAGA or independent groupings that were, attracted to things like Kennedy's message or Tulsi Gabbard. So the fact that there's a coalition or a coalescence of that viable part of America together right now, it's natural and good. And I hope that can harmonize with those, in groupings that also don't want to go for feudalism and depopulation in Eurasia. I'm hoping we can get some synergy there. Otherwise the Peter Thiel, Musk handlers, because I don't see Thiel or Musk as a thing unto themselves. I see them intellectually as maybe Justin Trudeau, as human biological algorithms that are assigned to mimic certain emotions and say certain syllogistic things on cue in controlled environments. There's nothing else that I see as a human process behind the eyeballs there for these people.
X means man merging with machine, right? It's God machine.
Is that what that means?
That's what X represents. It's like a demonic kind of symbol. And
I was also thinking maybe it had something to do with the double pyramid reflecting itself, perhaps.
Well, the double pyramid. I don't know if it might have something to do with that, but I know that a X-Men was right. The movie.
And you have the Thomas Huxley X Club too.
Exactly. That is the representation. It's supposed to be God merging with man. And every one of his companies is, X. So,
as above, so as below, I guess. Yeah, sort of.
Well,
which is the inverted pyramid. That's the whole idea of the Janus, thing. It's
and the Masons, and there's an X in there too, but on the ends, so I don't know, but but definitely Hermetic principles. I'm sure the whole as above, so below. But I agree with you. I think they seem to be. I was really just making the reference of the cyborg. At the very least, they're cybernetic. So and I agree with you. Well, all right. Well, thank you. If you have anything else you want to add, please do, and tell everybody where they can find you and all that good stuff.
Okay, we're at the 3 minutes, 3 hours, 33 mark, 33 seconds. That's creepy. Okay, so let's not end on 3:33.
Let's not do that.
So I'll just ramble on a little bit till we get to 3:34 at least. Okay. Not that I'm a numerologist, but I got a superstitious quality within me, I guess.
Yeah,
That's my,
no, I hear you. Let's not give them any fodder.
yeah. No, that's the Rising Tide Foundation website, risingtidefoundation.net that Cynthia and I manage. And it's a lot of fun, a lot of big ideas we try to keep moving on that site that help shake people out of the intellectual cage and desert of culture that we're supposed to adapt to. So we try to keep it fun. There's classes we do every week and reading groups and stuff that we do for people who become paid subscribers to our Substacks. Or if people just want to write in to info@risingtidefoundation.net. There's we can give you an invitation or two to some of our events. There is also Canadian. Oh yeah, that's my Twitter. My Twitter is there. It's at Ehret_Matthew. You can follow me there. I'm not too active, but I'm a little active. And then MatthewEhret.substack.com is also on that visual right there. I try to keep that going every day. And the Jack the Ripper series, this is going to be 3 books, like I said, coming out very soon. It's going to be I've never done 3 books being released at the same time, so we'll see how that goes. Yeah, it'll be fun. And some samples of some recent stuff I've put out. And last thing, CanadianPatriot.org. If people want to get my books that I've already published, those are all easily available on CanadianPatriot.org is the easiest way to find them. If you want a signed copy, send me an email, and I'll tell you how to get a signed copy of any of those books. And that's the Canadian Patriot site. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So are you like a super speed reader and super speed writer too?
Yeah. No. I mean, it depends. There's 2 kinds of writing, where you're either just like scanning, like what they call diagonal reading, where you're just catching the gist of things.
Yes.
But if somebody were to ask you like, hey, what was that chapter about? And you're like useless.
Yes.
So yeah, if I've got to do like garbage, like dumpster diving reading style, like I'm reading through crap that I don't like, but I have to, then I can be fast, but I won't receive it. And if I'm like reading something important, I'm very, very, very slow and usually reread paragraphs several times but the thing is, I think you always want to, and I guess you do something very similar too, because you're always in a compositional mode, like in your mind, you're reading for a purpose,
right,
to understand in order to teach. And whenever you get into that intentional mindset, it takes on a different quality, right? And the details aren't things you're memorizing to sound smart at the water cooler or pass a trivia test. You're like, I'm looking for the story that will engage people's minds so that they will have a moral purpose to do something with this, right? So I would say for anybody who's confused about that, try to start writing, start a Substack blog or whatever. And then you'll change your relationship with how you read and how you spend your time, how you select what you read as well is going to be different. So yeah. Oh yeah. That's our last podcast we did there. That was fun.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think that's really helpful for people because I think we live in a world where not a lot of people do read, and then when they do, I think reading comprehension, this is again not meant to be derogatory, it's just an observation, if you will, it's very low. But which is unfortunate. So
no, it really is. And it's like partly it's just this active versus passive reading or experiencing, right? Like it's like in music too. Like people, they used to be more trained to be active listeners to music. And before the days of like CDs or even like records, it would be it'd be difficult to get an experience with an orchestra or something. And so because it was so rare, it would be for something you'd have to go all the way by horse and buggy into town for a quality orchestra to even be there was rare. So when you sat down, you were fully engaged and really taking it in and thinking about it while it was happening, thinking about what modes or what themes were being developed. It was a different relationship. And then you'd think about it, your memory would be, you'd cherish it so much more. So after it was over, you'd still be thinking about it and using your memory and developing your memory power to think about the music, and what it was doing to you. And I think one of the downsides with technology is that it allows us the liberty to become more lazy and more, we take things for granted. So we it doesn't have to be. So that's the thing with the you know, the transhumanists.
Yeah,
they're of this view that it's like Marshall McLuhan and all these guys. They're like, it's necessary that as technology increases, that our powers of mind decrease in direct proportion to the point that we're gonna become useless, blubs who can't use their mind, and machines will become better and supersede us evolutionarily speaking unless we merge with them. So they got this whole weird equation. Now the reality is that's a free will choice. We can have technology that makes our life easier, but at the same time still hold on to those powers of memory. But it has to be done with, we have to have some passion, right? When we're reading things, we have to do it because we care, we're seeking, and not just trying to memorize the way school teaches us or trains us to just memorize to get right answers. We're not, that feeling of the love of reading for its own sake is not awoken. So yeah, we just have to think about those things. I'm speaking not to you, but to people who are watching us.
I think it's super important. I was just thinking about when you go see music these days, most people are busy filming it with their phones, and you know, so they're not even immersed in the experience. They're, you know, busy figuring out how they can share it and interacting on social media. So there's that.
It's so many degrees of separation. Yeah, it's wild.
So, what? Yeah.
Oh, I just did a generalized. Okay.
Yes.
No, this is great. Thank you, Courtenay.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching and listening.
All right.